every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, everybody. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Massive show today. Zelensky's here. Yes, that's right. The Ukrainian leader is in the UK today in full military attire, as usual, addressing Parliament and praising the strong British character that has been shown in response to the Russian invasion. He also said some very nice things, of course, as well about Boris Johnson, and his historic visit raises serious questions about how far we're prepared to go to support Ukraine. And I want to hear you on this one, ladies and gentlemen. Rishi Sunak has announced plans to train Ukrainian pilots, paving the way for them to eventually be able to fly sophisticated NATO standard jets. So then, does that mean that NATO is officially involved? Is that then World War III? But then what's the alternative? We can't just let Putin win, can we? I want your help, as I've said. Would you give Ukraine jets? Would you put troops on the ground? GBViews at gbnews.uk. I want to know how far you're willing to go, basically, to support Ukraine. Definitely two sides to that story. Another big one today is the government's anti-terror strategy has found that it's not doing enough to tackle non-violent Islamist extremism. The government has accepted all 34 recommendations of the long-awaited assessment of the Prevent Counter-Terror programme. But, supposedly, and get this, it wants to treat terrorism as a mental illness, and taxpayers' money may, stress on the may, have even gone to a group that supported the Taliban. Yeah. We're expecting to hear from the Home Secretary in the House of Commons. That's live, that's shortly. We'll bring that to you, as I've just said. Do you think that terrorism really is a mental illness? And couple of this, people. Could God soon become gender neutral? You heard. Bishops are to launch a project which could scrap male pronouns for God, as well as reference our Father, in favour of gender-neutral or indeed female alternatives. Get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Where do you draw the line on military aid for Ukraine? Big one, that. And do you think terror is a mental illness? gbviews at gbnews.uk. But right now, it's your headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 3 o'clock. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The President of Ukraine has left Buckingham Palace after meeting with King Charles. It's following an historic address he made to MPs at Westminster Hall. Volodymyr Zelensky was welcomed by the Prime Minister as he touched down in the UK this morning before the pair held a bilateral meeting at Downing Street. It's his first visit to the country since the start of Russia's invasion. In a speech to Parliament, Mr Zelensky thanked the British people for their ongoing support. He spoke of the last time he visited the UK and was invited to sit in Winston Churchill's chair at the War Rooms.
The guide smiled and offered me to sit down on this armchair from which war orders had been given. And he asked me, how did I feel? And I said that I certainly felt something. But it is only now that I know what the feeling was. And all Ukrainians know it perfectly well too. It is the feeling of how bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Governments and organisations around the world are offering support to Turkey and Syria after devastating earthquakes killed more than 11,000 people. 3 British nationals are still missing following the disaster. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit on Monday morning, with a second major quake a few hours later. The government has pledged to support Turkey's president, who's declared a state of emergency for 3 months in the 10 worst affected cities. Erdogan has been visiting one of the areas affected. A 77-strong British search and rescue team are assisting in the country. The new Conservative chairman has told GB News upcoming local elections would be a challenge for his party following a mini-cabinet reshuffle yesterday. Greg Hands has replaced Nadeem Zahawi, who was sacked over his tax affairs. The government has also created 4 new departments with an aim to boost the economy and address the energy crisis. Grant Shapps will head up a new energy security and net zero department, which will focus on securing the UK's long-term energy supply. The Home Secretary says the government's anti-terror prevent programme needs a major reform after a review found the programme is not doing enough to tackle non-violent Islamist extremism. Suella Braverman says the government needs to better understand the threats and ideology underpinning them. The Home Office has accepted all 34 recommendations. The former MP for Sheffield, Jared O'Mara, has been found guilty of 6 counts of fraud from during his time in office. The Labour politician, who was a Member of Parliament between 2017 and 2019, was on trial for submitting fake invoices to the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority to fund a cocaine habit. A jury cleared him of 2 other charges. Sentencing will take place tomorrow at Leeds Crown Court. The Church of England could move away from the 1,000-year-old tradition of referring to God as he in the future. It's after priests within the church asked to use gender-neutral terms instead. Religious leaders say a new project on gendered language will begin this spring, with any changes to be approved by the church's decision-making body, Synod. And Royal Mail have revealed the first and second-class stamps that will feature a portrait of King Charles. The design draws inspiration from stamps that featured the late Queen Elizabeth. Royal Mail's director, David Gold, has described it as a defining part of the King's reign. The stamps go on sale from April. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Patrick.
Freedom will win and Russia will lose. That's the message from Volodymyr Zelensky. The Ukrainian president came to the UK today and delivered a hallmark speech at Westminster Hall to members of both houses of Parliament. In his address, Zelensky praised PMs past and present, so both Boris and Rishi, for their assistance in the war effort. He said that global UK leadership was needed, declaring that Britain extended its helping hand when the world had not yet come to understand how to react, i.e. that we got in there first. And I think we're absolutely right to do that, ladies and gentlemen. But I am asking you today, at what point do we maybe draw the line? Do you want to draw the line? What's the alternative? I suppose we can't just let Putin win, can we? But at the same time, when we start talking about training up troops to fight NATO standard fighter jets. Does that then mean that NATO is officially involved? Does that then mean World War III? Does that then increase the risk of a nuclear war? Your views, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Would you go as far, as plenty of you do seem to want to, of putting troops on the ground over there? Lots of questions today, but let's cross to Buckingham Palace now to speak to our royal reporter, Cameron Walker. Cameron, great to have you on the show. Now, Zelensky has just left after a visit with the King, hasn't he?
He certainly has, Patrick. Yes, a very large motorcade has just left the north gate of Buckingham Palace here. It was a meeting that was scheduled to last around 45 minutes or so. It happened in the 1844 room of the palace. The King greeted President Zelensky with a handshake and warm smiles. Ironically, actually, President Zelensky arrived having just delivered his speech in Westminster Hall at Buckingham Palace before the King himself. The King was slightly delayed coming back from prior engagements in East London with the British Bangladeshi community. So originally, President Zelensky was greeted by his equerry, Lieutenant Colonel Johnny Thompson, and the King's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, first. But the King has expressed in the past support for Ukraine, particularly when he was Prince of Wales. He had very strong words following the invasion. He called out Putin's, and I quote, brutal aggression following the invasion of Ukraine. And President Zelensky, in his speech in Westminster Hall, talked about the gratitude he has to His Majesty the King and the royal family for their support. He said it was a great honour and a truly special moment for me and my country to be invited to Buckingham Palace for an audience with the King. Now, President Zelensky said that he intended to bring up with King Charles the fact that he has his RAF wings, but that the fact in Ukraine every pilot is a king in themselves. He was referring, of course, to the fact that President Zelensky wants the West to send fighter jets to aid that war in Ukraine. But of course, President Zelensky, I don't think, because the King has to be very careful in terms of politics now, I don't think we'll see such strong words as we have done when he was Prince of Wales. But I think the fact that the King and President Zelensky was in Buckingham Palace, and we have photographs of that power of soft diplomacy that the King has, is really shining through here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Cameron, thank you very much. Cameron Walker there, our royal reporter just outside Buckingham Palace, where Zelensky has just left. Earlier on, he was in Downing Street and then he was in Westminster Hall. I've been asking you and will be asking you, because this is the big story today, OK? And potentially, depending on what happens next in Ukraine, only going to get bigger as well. Been asking you what you think in terms of how far Britain should now go in terms of support for Ukraine. I just want to quickly give you a little bit of context in terms of what we've done so far. In total, the UK provided £2.3 billion of military aid to Ukraine in 2022, more than any other nation except the United States. And we have committed to sustain that same level of funding for the coming year. UK armed forces, they've trained thousands of Ukrainian soldiers as well. We've committed to tanks and now to training fighter pilots as well. Is that the next step, really, towards actually, frankly, giving them NATO-sponsored fighter jets? And what would that really mean, ladies and gentlemen? A mixed bag in the inbox so far. Just quickly, Patrick, we should give them everything that they need, and that's from Andrew. But John says, why is it always Britain who has to stand up and bear the cost? And that, I think, really is a good example of where we're at. So keep your views coming in, gbviews at gbnews.uk. But I'm joined now by our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who was one of those who was in Westminster Hall for President Zelensky's speech. Catherine, a momentous occasion.
It really was a moment in history. Westminster Hall has seen so many historical moments, and for Volodymyr Zelensky to come and address both houses of Parliament, this is only the second time he's been out of Ukraine since the war began. Last year, at the end of last year, he went, of course, and I think that's a measure of the high regard that Ukraine hold the UK in, and the very, very special relationship that he has. Boris Johnson, of course, he paid special tribute to, and Rishi Sunak, the current PM, is continuing in that vein. And it was an emotive speech. He's very skilled at speaking. Of course, he trained as an actor. He's there in the khaki sweatshirt that he always seems to wear these days. And he came thanking the UK, saying what a special moment it had been to come to the UK before, about drinking tea, talked about looking forward to meeting the king, and then cycled back to tea again as a way to get into requesting planes, because of course we were the first to come forward with support last year. We were the first to say, yes, we'll send you modern battle tanks, and now his hope is that he can persuade the UK to be the first to supply fighter jets. Now, there's no guarantee at all that that's going to happen. Boris Johnson has called again for us to send them. He said we've got 100 Typhoon jets. That would be the best single use of them. But of course, it's not up to Boris Johnson because he's no longer Prime Minister. So time will tell. But the fact that Rishi Sunak has now announced that in addition to training Ukrainian troops, they're now going to train Ukrainian pilots on UK soil and Marines would suggest certainly that there is a shift in that direction.
Yes, indeed. Catherine, thank you very, very much. Catherine Forster there, our political reporter, and that is the Westminster angle. Well, in a few moments, I'll be speaking to former Defence Minister, Conservative MP Alec Shelbrooke. But first, I am joined now by Dr Stephen Hall, a lecturer in Russian and post-Soviet politics at the University of Bath. Great to have you on the show. I'm just going to ask the question I think that a lot of our viewers and our listeners really want asked, which is, are we kind of already at war with Russia?
Well, I don't think we are actually at war because there's not been obviously a declaration of war. I think that the UK is supporting militarily and economically Ukraine. It's not fighting a war against Russia by itself. If it was, then NATO troops would be in Ukraine. But because Ukraine is not a member of NATO, it's not actually fighting Russian troops. But this is a different thing. As we know, countries are allowed to support one another in terms of self-defense from an aggressor.
Yes, indeed. The argument against giving Zelensky any more stuff, really, military equipment or support, is that it will anger Putin. And that could lead to a massive escalation from a chap who is potentially already relatively unhinged. Of course, you are a lecturer in Russian and post-Soviet politics. Do you think there's any risk of that?
Well, I certainly think that there is a possibility, as we've seen some reports coming out, that the Russian elite believe that Putin is crazy. But I don't think that there is any escalation in terms of nuclear escalation, which is something that I think you were alluding to. We would see certainly that we need to give support to Ukraine, as much support to Ukraine as possible, in order to protect Ukraine from Russian aggression. And this, I don't think, is going to lead to a significant escalation on the part of the Russians, because I don't believe that they necessarily have the capacity to further escalate to a great extent.
OK, just very finally on this one now, the big question is about fighter jets, it appears to be today. Would you advise us to send fighter jets, or for NATO to send fighter jets over there?
I think at the moment there is very little. I think that certainly there is a need to send fighter jets. Ukraine has the pilots. It needs to be able to win the skies, control the skies. Fighter jets are necessary. If the Typhoons or the Eurofighters are lying idle, as it were, then they should be sent to Ukraine in order to support Ukraine in its need to defend itself from Russian aggression.
OK, look, thank you very much. Short and sweet, but it's a bit of a high-tempo start to this show, I'm afraid, so I'll chat to you again soon. That's Dr Stephen Hall, a lecturer in Russian and post-Soviet politics at the University of Bath. Very pleased to say that I'm now joined by Alec Shelbrooke, who is the Conservative MP for Elmet and Rothwell, who was in Westminster Hall for President Zelensky's speech, and, of course, somewhat of a defence expert yourself. Look, thank you very, very much. I mean, it was clearly a, remarkable day, in the sense, a historic day. A lot of the British public, I think, are concerned about the risk for escalation and whether or not we are just paving the way now for full frontal war with Russia. Your views?
Yeah, I mean, look, certainly, this is our war. Be under no mistake, this is our war. This is our front line. Cost of living crisis, whether it be fuel, whether it be wheat, whether it be fertilisers, this is our war. And if we are to lose this war, then the reality is that Russia will have a financial control over the resources we need. They will walk into other countries. We cannot isolate ourselves from this war. The action we are taking is to support a democratic elected country, which, if we are to lose, will allow a major power to walk into other democratic elected countries. We cannot isolate ourselves. So it's absolutely vital that we are giving the weapons and supplies that are needed to help Ukraine win this war.
I take what you're saying, but you're saying this is our war. If people had initially said the first day that Putin rolled the tanks in and Britain sprung into action, as it was indeed right to do so, and since then, 2.3 billion quid's worth of military aid, we've got a whole range of stuff. There's Stormer vehicles, anti-air missiles, multiple launch rocket systems, tanks now, training for fighter pilots as well. Are we going to send troops?
Yeah, I'm going to try and guess what you said there because I was picking up a few bits.
Troops?
But I think we're just talking about troops. Yeah, so what we are doing, of course, is using our troops to train their troops. I don't think it's the troop message. I think it is about hardware. I think we do need to send more tanks. I think we do need to get aircraft in there. Now, the aircraft question is one of which type of aircraft to use. I think it was terrible of the Americans to put the kibosh on Romania and Poland wanting to give its MiGs to the Ukrainians because they know how to fly those now. They could be using those jets now and they could be backfilled, those countries, with the F-35s or the Typhoons. So I wouldn't mind seeing Typhoons getting sent there to be used, but there is a time lag in training pilots on there. So I'm not so sure it's about ground troops. I think that's probably taking it to a different area. But there is certainly a hell of a lot we can be doing. And quite frankly, if you've got all this equipment saying, well, what do we do? It's still our war. And the fact is that if we don't win on this battlefield, there will be another battlefield which we'll have to be involved in. We've got to defeat Russia.
Is it just our war, though? Because, yes, other countries are getting involved, but only a little bit. Why is it our responsibility? We're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Shouldn't the Germans and the French and, frankly, other European countries who, if Putin is as intent on expansion as people such as yourself say that he is, well, they'd crumble first, wouldn't they?
Yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a bad line. I'm trying to just guess what you're saying. So, in terms of why is it our war? I mean, it isn't just our war, obviously. It is a wider picture. Britain is obviously at the forefront of contribution. And, yeah, I would like to see more of the European colleagues do more to stand up to it. I mean, quite frankly, it is ridiculous the amount of time it's taken for the German government to give the go-ahead for the Leopard tanks. And that speaks to a whole wider issue about European defence, which I'll come on your show and talk about another time. But the reality is that the Americans are stepping up, but in my mind, they just don't do it quickly enough. And there's always a pause around certain areas, the MiGs being the main thing. But look, we are a country who is big on the world stage. We're one of the nuclear powers. We do take a lead in these things because we recognise, and I think there's a slight different European culture, and I think, you know, we are sort of separate in that democracy absolutely reigns supreme and has got to be protected. And I think sometimes when you see the dithering going on, it raises a whole host of other questions. But that doesn't mean we should say, well, we've got to wait for them to do something. We're leaders. We're world leaders, and we recognise what will happen to this country if we don't help the Ukrainians win this war.
Just lastly, I'm aware it's a bad line. I hope you can hear this clearly. If Volodymyr Zelensky explicitly asked for troops on the ground, would you support that?
So in terms of asking for troops on the ground, I think it all depends in the context of how they want to be used. If it's about training troops on the ground, and we need to get those closer to theatre, maybe, but we are actually, our troops are engaged heavily in training Ukrainian troops, and actually the British Army is learning a lot of the Ukrainian soldiers. So I think it's not necessarily about putting them up to the front line, which I think perhaps is the conversation people have. It's about what we can support. But actually, what we need more of is not soldiers on the front line, it's the equipment to be used on the front line.
OK, look, thank you very, very much. Really great to have you on the show and get that insight from you and your views. And I do hope that we do talk again soon, actually. That's Alex Shelbrooke there, Conservative MP for Elmet and Rothwell. He was in Westminster Hall for President Zelensky's speech and, of course, as well, was Minister of State for Defence Procurement in the Ministry of Defence from September 2022 to October 2022, so a brief stint, but some insight nonetheless. Right, so you're with me, Patrick Christys on GB News. Coming up, a review into the government's anti-terror strategy has found that it's not doing enough to tackle non-violent Islamist extremism. The government has accepted all 34 recommendations of this long-awaited assessment of the PREVENT programme, which aims to stop people turning to terrorism, including a recommendation, and this I think is vital, to treat terrorism as a mental illness. Do you think terrorism is a mental illness? I want to know. And the partner of missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley, has visited the spot where police believe that she fell into the River Wyre. We'll be crossing live to Lancashire in just a sec. Loads to get stuck into today. Let's have the absolute lot of it. I'll be back in a tick.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
and right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, the partner of missing Nicola Bulley has visited the spot where police believe she fell into the River Wyre. Yesterday, Lancashire Police Superintendent Sally Riley said detectives had looked at every single potential suspicion that had come in and discounted them. So the search for the mother of two is still ongoing. Let's get more on the very latest and cross to Lancashire now, where GB News' reporter Sophie Reaper is. Sophie, thank you very, very much. So, yes, her partner visited the scene where police believe that she fell into the river.
He did indeed, and unfortunately the biggest update I can give you at this point is there really isn't that much of an update to give, and certainly not the update that we know that Nicola's friends and family are absolutely desperate for. We do know, as you say, that Paul, her partner, has been down at the site this morning where police believe Nicola originally went missing from. We know that he also spoke with Peter Faulding, who is the founder of SGI. We believe that Peter walked Paul through the different stages of their investigation. They've been here for the past 3 days helping Lancashire Police search the River Wyre for any signs of Nicola Bulley. We also know now that today is the last day that SGI will be here at the River Wyre in Lancashire. We think that they feel they've done all they can, and Peter Faulding has said, wherever she is, I hope closure comes soon. We also know that the police divers have been here in the River Wyre today. We're expecting them any moment to appear for the end of their day, but as far as we know, neither them nor the SGI team have found any sign that could indicate exactly what's happened to Nicola.
Goodness me, yes. Well, the mystery continues to deepen, unfortunately, doesn't it? Thank you very, very much, Sophie, for that update. No doubt we'll be going back to you as anything comes to us. Reporter Sophie Reaper there, who's from Lancashire, at the scene. Interesting yesterday as well, we did speak to Peter Faulding, who's the chap in charge of the independent sonar dive team that's taking place there. He was pretty adamant here anyway that they are doing everything they can. They've not located anything yet, and that, to his mind anyway, would seem to imply that potentially Nicola is not in the river. We spoke a lot about that yesterday. Not much of an update taking place, and with every day, this is now day 12, with every day that goes on, the mystery seems to deepen. But the Home Secretary, moving on, has pledged to overhaul the government's Prevent scheme after an independent review found the organisation was too concerned with treating terrorism as a mental illness rather than a threat. William Shawcross's review stated that treating terrorism as a mental illness or a social deficiency that can be placated by social services might make acts of extreme violence seem more intelligible to some, yet ultimately this approach fails to grasp the inherently ideological nature of radicalisation and terrorism. So his recommendations also stress that Prevent should go back to first principles and reassert its overall objective of stopping people from becoming terrorists or supporting terrorism. Now, Amnesty International UK, who commented this, by the way, fascinating. We did, as we often do with Amnesty International, trying to get them on this very show, and then it all goes rather quiet. But there we go. Amnesty International UK says the Prevent review has no legitimacy and was critical of the findings, claiming it was riddled with biased thinking and plain anti-Muslim prejudice. Well, yes, like I've said, they did not particularly want to come on and back that up live on air, but there we go. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who is expected to make a statement about the findings in the Commons later, well, she had this to say. This independent review has identified areas where real reform is required. This includes a need for Prevent to better understand Islamist ideology, which underpins the predominant terrorist threat facing the UK. I wholeheartedly accept all 34 recommendations, and I'm committed to quickly delivering wholesale change to ensure we are taking every possible step to protect our country from the threat posed by terrorism. What I find fascinating here, there are certain things that just don't seem to add up to me. How can it be inherently anti-Islamic and against all Muslims? I spoke to an imam last night on a show I was covering between 8 and 9 p.m. And he said, oh, it's against all Muslims. OK, but then at the same time, it is now being accused of, well, potentially anyway, being too soft on it. So how can both of those things be particularly married up? I don't quite understand it. The idea that it's treating radical Islamic or indeed far-right terror as predominantly a mental illness and not some kind of warped, ideological, dangerous criminal behaviour, I think is a little bit of a concern, especially when you look at some of the people who slipped through the net, the amount of terror attacks we've had in this country where people were known to authorities. How can it really be that Prevent is bang up front when it comes to all of this stuff? Oh, and yes, just to top it all off, there was one particular group as well who supposedly took money from the Prevent programme and then went on to support, at least verbally anyway, the Taliban, which is not a great look. And just to top it all off as well, we were even told that this report might be watered down as to not cause racial tension. So doesn't add up to me. Joining me now is Jahan Mahmood, former government advisor on Prevent. Jahan, thank you very much. A lot of strong feelings, quite a lot of them coming from me, to be fair, about this Prevent scheme. Is it inherently anti-Muslim?
Well, it seems to be disproportionately focused on Muslims when the far-right concern is increasing and has been increasing. I have more questions, Patrick, on Shawcross as being the man who's doing the review. That worries me more than anything, to be fair. OK, well, go on. Talk to me about that, then. Well, basically, he belongs to a certain spectrum of people who believe Muslims are going to outbreed the indigenous and take over the country. And I think that is an ideology in its own right, which is closer to some of the right-wing ideologues. Yes, of course, ideology does play a role. But I've also found in my research and having spoken to people who are on the periphery and those convicted of terrorism that some of these guys do have mental health issues. There's no doubt about that. From citing a report by MI5 from 2008, they found that these extremists actually had a poor understanding of their own faith. If it is ideological and Islam has a big role in it, then you'd wonder why the whole Muslim populace isn't up in arms. Especially,
but I think, with respect, if I may, I think possibly being slightly disingenuous on a couple of points there. You're clearly a very intelligent man, and I refuse to believe that you don't understand that, for example, the far right, absolutely undisputably on the rise. Far-right terrorism on the rise, but from an incredibly low base. And the main threat, as anyone in the security services will tell you, is still from radical Islamist terrorism. And on that point as well, the argument isn't that all Muslims are bad. It's not that at all. It's the fact that radical Islamist terrorism, which is a warped interpretation...
Let me just give you the figures, Patrick. I think on average it works out to about 5 deaths per year due to acts of terrorism by a Muslim, let's say, right? Now, the level of disproportionate focus on Muslims for some Muslim groups and advocacy groups is a concern, and rightly so. I mean, for me, who's been involved in national security and certainly is deeply worried about, any civilian losing their life. I mean, what I don't understand is there are approximately 200 to 300 people who die by way of knife crime every year. The media just doesn't seem to be interested. I'm interested in civilians across the board.
Now, that's not true, because I do a heck of a lot on knife crime. I do a heck of a lot on knife crime. And I agree with you, absolutely. The stabathon that seems to be taking place in not just our capital city, but across the country, the breakdown in law and order, yeah, absolutely. But PREVENT is specifically counter-terrorism, and you said that kind of only 5 people a year die. I'm sure that you would argue as well that that is 5 too many. But the main reason behind that is that our security services stop so many terror attacks, often at the very, very late stage. And the vast majority of those stops are radical Islamist attacks.
No, that's not actually true. In recent years, it's actually been the far right. There's been an increasing number since 2020. So we should look at this from a balanced perspective. And we're not. And I think that people like Shawcross, who has a pretty anti-Muslim view, and he does belong to a group of people, let's call it out for what it is that he believes that Muslims are breeding like rabbits and are somehow going to take over the country. And with the political representation we currently have in government, I mean, I'm pretty inept. I don't see that happening in at least the next 50 years. So he's got nothing to worry about. He's actually, if anything, he's just dividing the perspective, just public opinion on himself. I think they need to remove him and get them on his spare.
I will give, I will give, as you can imagine, Mr. Shawcross the right to reply in a minute, but just one more with you, if that's all right, which is that there are reports, strong reports, that groups such as the Karimia group were given quite a lot of money as part of the PREVENT scheme, and then, rather unfortunately, went on to suggest that it might be quite a good thing that the Taliban were now in charge of Afghanistan. The British public, I'm sure you can understand, would be absolutely terrified that money to stop extremism was going to an individual who might even entertain the idea that the Taliban are quite a good thing.
I mean, Patrick, I've got a bigger worry that the Americans and the British were involved in some kind of negotiation for the Taliban to come back in the first place. I don't think that was sensible. I think we can call out individuals, that's fine. But if you've got double standards across the spectrum, that's a worry as well. Because
I get that.
We've had the British
two wrongs. I understand what you're saying.
I understand what you're saying. But look, you're saying let's hold the average man.
Should taxpayers' money have gone to an individual whose job it was, at least on paper, is trying to stop extremism, who is sympathetic to the Taliban?
Well, to be fair, I'm not in a position to answer that question. I think the government and the Home Office should be. I'm just saying double standards exist across the spectrum. And for me, the great worry is that you've got a government who's meant to lead by example, and then people fall into place. You've got a government who's supporting and sending weapons to the Saudis and then saying, oh, by the way, Wahhabism is this literal interpretation of Islam that we're worried about, that has influenced the likes of the Taliban and has supported the Taliban. And I think, you've got to call yourself out first before you start picking on individuals, because you're leading the government.
There are elements to this I agree with you on. There are elements to this. I think it's madness that we're doing things like that with the Saudis. Yeah, look, Jahan, thank you very much. A relatively wide-ranging discussion. I did enjoy it. Jahan Mahmood there, former government advisor on PREVENT. I imagine there'll be strong views on that. I've got to give a response now, obviously, from Mr. Shawcross himself, who said that accusations that PREVENT was anti-Muslim were an insult and alleged that there was a concerted campaign to undermine it. So that's his response there, because there was some rather strong stuff levelled at him by old Jahan, who was the former government advisor on PREVENT. Right, well, there we go. We've rattled through the first half hour of this show. You're up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, is God a man or a woman? Yeah, it's a question that's being debated today by the Church of England as it considers gender-neutral terms to refer to the Almighty. Oh, my God. Now's your headlines.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. The President of Ukraine has left Buckingham Palace after meeting with King Charles. It's following an historic address he made to MPs at Westminster Hall. Volodymyr Zelensky was welcomed by the Prime Minister as he touched down in the UK this morning before the pair held a bilateral meeting at Downing Street. It's his first visit to the country since the start of Russia's invasion. In a speech to Parliament, Mr Zelensky thanked the British people for their ongoing support. He spoke of the last time he visited the UK and was invited to sit in Winston Churchill's chair at the War Rooms.
The guide smiled and offered me to sit down on this armchair from which war orders had been given. And he asked me, how did I feel? And I said that I certainly felt something. But it is only now that I know what the feeling was. And all Ukrainians know it perfectly well too. It is the feeling of how bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Governments and organisations around the world are offering support to Turkey and Syria after devastating earthquakes have killed more than 11,000 people. 3 British nationals are still missing following the disaster. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit on Monday morning, with a second major quake a few hours later. The government has pledged support to Turkey's President Erdogan, who's been visiting one of the affected areas. A state of emergency has been declared for 3 months in the 10 worst affected cities. And a 77-strong British search and rescue team are currently assisting the country. The Home Secretary says the government's anti-terror prevent programme needs a major reform after a review found the programme is not doing enough to tackle non-violent Islamist extremism. Swallow Braverman says the government needs to better understand the threats and ideology underpinning them. The Home Office has accepted all 34 recommendations. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
He's the king of breakfast TV and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this
you
morning.
even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back. Just a quick one to throw ahead, ladies and gentlemen. In a matter of minutes, I'm reliably informed, we are going to be going live to the House of Commons, where Swallow Braverman is going to be giving an update on that Prevent Counter-Terror Strategy update that we had earlier for you, which is basically that it's going to adopt 34 recommendations. Essentially, they supposedly anyway, not the government, but supposedly Prevent has been treating terrorism as a mental illness. Some would say far too often. Is it even a mental illness? Is it just a dangerous criminal tendency? So, yes, we'll be hearing from our Home Secretary live in the House of Commons about all of that. But moving on, protests have been held this morning against the Church of England's offer of prayers of blessings for same-sex couples, calling them an insult and not sufficient. So the synod, often thought as the Church's parliament, is preparing for a historic vote on the matter this week. And I suspect this is one of slightly more intrigue to you all. Even God's pronouns are being called into question, as priests are considering stopping using gendered language such as he and him. And a new project has been launched to discuss the use of more inclusive terms. But it's come under heavy criticism, obviously, by Conservatives who argue that male and female imagery is not interchangeable. I don't think it's just Conservatives, to be fair, who are criticising whether or not we should make God gender neutral, but there we go. Joining me now to discuss this is British Catholic layman Dr Gavin Ashenden. Dr Gavin, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Is God a man?
Patrick, there are two ways of dealing with this. One is simple and the other slightly more complicated. So the simple answer to your question is that we use God's preferred pronouns, and his preferred pronouns is a he. The slightly more complicated one is what happens if you change his pronouns? And the answer is we have four possibilities in the history of religious experience. If you call God an it, you become Buddhist. If you call God they, you become polytheist, rather like the Hindus. If you call God she, you enter into the world of fertility religions and Gaia. And if you call God he, you end up with Judeo-Christianity. So it would be consistent for Judeo-Christians to stick with the pronoun that defines God in the terms they were given it.
Now, just reiterate something you said earlier then. Has God pronounced himself? How sure are you that God's preferred? Because that's what everyone's doing on Twitter now, isn't it? You've got pronouns she, her, or whatever, and you have to stick with those. Sam Smith has chosen his their pronouns, and God has done it, you're saying. So God's pronounced himself.
Well, one of the reasons I'm a Christian is because looking at the different religions, all the religions in the world have been invented by people. I mean, atheists would say that's 100% of them. But Christians believe that God disclosed himself. And they said, I am like. It always has to be like, because these things aren't literal. They're usually metaphorical in order to get more of the truth in. I'm like your father. So if God says, I'm like your father, that's his preferred pronoun, preferred image. And that's the one we use. If we changed it, we end up, as C.S. Lewis said, with a different religion. So the thing to do is to stay with the religion that God disclosed. If you believe God disclosed himself, and Christians do, then you have to stay with what he offered you.
Is this actually quite a worrying push to appease something like 0.06% of the population?
Well, the trouble with religion is when it goes bad, it ends up by being something that people make up. So you can either take the best religion, which is handed down to you, and you look at what's worked best, or you start making it up again all by yourself. And the problem with what's going on at the moment is people are cutting their roots with the past, and making up what appears to be most congenial to them. And it's not going to work. It never has worked. Well, again, one of the reasons for being a traditionalist is you use what has a good track record for working. So yes, you're quite right. This new impetus within the Church of England is a form of culturally attuned wokery, and it won't work. It'll become a different religion and then die out.
How would the Lord's Prayer work?
Well, it wouldn't, because one of the things that Jesus did was to say, being in the hands of God, having a relationship with God is like being cared for by your father. And so that you can get closest to God by talking to him as if he were your father. If you begin to change that to something else, it's a different image, a different picture, a different relationship with God. If you want a relationship with a mother God, then there are plenty of examples of that all through history. And indeed, a lot of religion has involved fertility worship and involved goddesses. But it's a different way of having a relationship with God. Yeah. So the Our Father would change. It would simply be a different God, a different relationship, a different religion.
I think you've made two incredibly compelling points there. You made a few, to be fair, but two highlights for me. The highlight reel of Dr Gavin Ashenden, as it were, which is that basically God has already pronounced himself, so we should obviously respect God's pronouns, as indeed we do for the likes of Sam Smith, and keep it as a he. But also, if we were to change it, then we would be fundamentally changing a religion, which is presumably not what the Church of England actually want to do. But thank you very much. Great topic. That's his British Catholic layman, Dr Gavin Ashenden there. Now, a spokesman Spokesman, well, is it a spokesman? Is it a spokesperson? An individual for the church, it might be AI, for the Church of England said, this is nothing new. Christians have recognised since ancient times that God is neither male or female, yet the variety of ways of addressing and describing God found in Scripture has not always been reflected in our worship. There are absolutely no plans to abolish or substantially revise currently authorised liturgies. You can tell I'm not exactly an academic, can't you? And no such changes could be made without extensive legislation. So there we go. It looks as though God's own preferred pronouns are safe for the moment. But, hey, it's only a matter of time, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? Right, moving on. A number of politicians have suggested that MPs who lose elections should be given more generous redundancy payouts. The reason I'm laughing is for what's coming up now, right? Training for future roles and a medal to thank them for their service, OK? So, I mean, this is just, there we go. Well done, you've lost an election, here's a medal. During a recent inquiry, the Commons Administration Committee noted a lack of recognition for MPs' work and found that some experience financial challenges and hardship after losing their seats. Yeah, fair enough, absolutely. They used examples of resettlement packages offered by other countries, including Germany, where politicians with a minimum of 1 year in the job receive a transitional payout to help them step into new employment. So I suppose it's basically encompassing this idea that pretty much overnight, if there's a snap election and you get biffed, you then could lose your job. And I understand that that is difficult for MPs who will have a lot of outgoings. Maybe you've even had to rent a place in London, say, and all of this stuff. Anyway, but the idea of a medal really makes me laugh. Joining me now is Chair of the House of Commons Administration Committee. It's Sir Charles Walker. Sir Charles, thank you very much. Now, do you want a medal?
No, it was one small part. So I think when people leave a job, they get a leaving present, don't they? And this isn't a medal in the honours system. It doesn't put letters after your name. But actually, serving in democracy is a really good thing. Serving your country, an elected member of parliament is a good thing. And we thought as a committee that actually when you leave, a few weeks, say, after you've lost your seat, you could be welcomed to the Speaker's quarters, come with your children, your wife, your partner, whatever, and you would get a medallion of service, Speaker's Medallion of Service, Democracy or Parliament. So I know the press, and you've been very good about this.
I think we might have lost Sir Charles. We're just going to try and get Sir Charles back. But look, what he's saying that I am, for the record, being deliberately flippant. Who? Me? No. Deliberately flippant about this medal business, OK? It just makes me laugh because you know how now we don't have winners and losers on Sports Day. Everyone knows who's won and lost on Sports Day, don't they? And everyone gets the same medal. It's like you've got, Speedy Gonzalez up there at front and just like Fat Timmy waddling at the back. But no, it's all the same. It's all the same. It just made me laugh, the idea that an MP could come in and do an absolutely catastrophically awful job, get biffed and then still get a medal. But there are serious questions, though, genuinely, about financial support packages for politicians who do lose their jobs. Because, and hear me out on this one, politicians get a good standard wage, certainly by modern standards in terms of in life, especially in light of the fact that we're doing a lot of talking about people on strikes, aren't we? So we're doing a lot of talking about people in the public sector who are on, let's say, 30, 35 grand. Don't talk about the pensions. We'll leave that out for now. Politicians, about 89 grand. And I understand all of that. But for a lot of people who are the best and the brightest in this country, £89,000 a year is not a huge amount of money, certainly not compared to what they could be making if they went and coined it in the city or really set up their own business and went absolutely flying with it. And so if you're going to entice them in on 89 grand, still a good wage with expenses, entice them in, it might be an idea to make sure that if they do lose their job overnight, say, in terms of a snap election, that they know that there is at least a bit of a cushion there. But that might go down like a cup of cold sick with a lot of people at the minute, middle of a cost of living crisis, who are struggling to pay their bills. GBViews at gbnews.uk. I wouldn't give them a medal, though. I think that's absolutely pathetic. Anyway, what kind of condition is your street in? Well, one road in Birmingham might just be the worst in Britain when it comes to fly tipping, burnt-out cars and potholes. Good grief. Crawford Street is in the Saltley area of the city, and, well, it has it all, apparently. We sent our West Midlands reporter Jack Carlson to what supposedly, on paper at least, sounds like a war zone.
You might be mistaken for thinking this road is the set of a new blockbuster apocalypse film, but this is Crawford Street in Birmingham. Plagued by cars left stripped in the street, potholes and fly tipping, this might be the most neglected street in the country. It's only 0.2 miles in length, but drivers using this cut-through have to battle with the conditions. Jerry Moynihan is a community activist and has been documenting the condition of the area before reporting his findings to the council.
Now, since 2018, I've been in contact with the council about trying to get the fly tipping removed, the abandoned cars, the cars that are burnt out. This is a place where people continuously come to dump their rubbish. As the local businesses confirm, there are frequent fires here. Now, when the fly tipping goes up in flames, the local fire service has to come out. That's a minimum of £500 per time. It's not just the cost of clearing it, it's the cost of not clearing the fly tipping, because some other service, such as the fire service, has to come out and it's a cost to them.
The amount of fly tipping is an issue for businesses based on the road too. Tahir Hussain works at a salvage yard.
They've been fly tipping on this road. It's been over 7 years, 10 years. I've been here for 15 years, but this has been going for a long time. And Birmingham City Council are doing nothing at all to help us out. We pay our rates on time, but the thing is, we see a state of this road. You're talking about every week we email them, but they're not coming back to us at all.
Last year, a man who dumped business waste on the street was ordered to pay more than £1,400 after a successful court prosecution by Birmingham City Council. But Jerry Moynihan stresses this problem engulfs the inner city.
I think, unfortunately, this is an inner city area. It's an area of deprivation. I don't think the council are inclined to do anything. As you've seen with the just short distance from here, the local youth playground area, it's fly tipped. It's been blocked off. I think the area is just generally being neglected.
In response to the issues on Crawford Street, a Birmingham City Council spokesperson said, "We are working hard to improve the condition of the city's roads and carry out regular inspections. We aim to clear fly tipping within 2 working days, but white goods can take up to 14. If we have evidence, we will prosecute." For now, this road remains a hotspot for waste, and the local campaign for due and proper clearance continues. Jack Carson, GB News, Birmingham.
Just £2 a month could help clean the Crawford Street in the Saltley area. That is obviously Britain's worst street. It's very hard to see. So we've got, if you're listening on radio, mattresses there. It looks like someone set fire to a Premier Inn. We've also got potholes that you could swim in, burnt out cars, for goodness sake, traffic cones, a fridge freezer. It's got the absolute lot of it, this, hasn't it? I mean, that is... Well, let's be honest with you, the Birmingham Tourist Board will not be thanking us for this. But, yes, it is also interesting because I was covering a story last night. We're going to talk about it a bit later on, actually, which is in relation to the amount of council tax you're now paying. Now, I would be inclined, of course, certainly not implying that anyone around the Crawford Street area in Saltley in the West Midlands should break the law in any way, but you would have to raise serious questions about what on earth you were paying your council tax for, wouldn't you? I mean, that is just remarkable. Council tax needs to be going up pretty much across the board. And as well, some local councils are actually in, get this, more than £1 billion worth of debt. And when you look at streets like Crawford Street and potholes all over the country, it makes you wonder, what on earth is our money going towards? But yes, there we go. Thank you very much, Jack Carson, for bringing us a report there from what I think we can all agree is probably Britain's worst street. If not, I would hate to see the contenders. But there we go. Right, look, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on something a lot more serious, although the residents of Crawley Street might disagree with me there. But President Zelensky's visit to the UK. Now, I've been floating various different questions on this. I absolutely copped it on Twitter earlier. I just floated very gently the question, why is he always in military garb, OK? And people say, well, his country's at war. Yeah, I get that, but, you know. Anyway, Zelensky is over here. He's basically asking for fighter jets, in a sense. We are supposedly thinking about, well, definitely, it would appear anyway, going to help them train fighter pilots who can then fly NATO-accredited fighter jets. So essentially, NATO would then be full frontal involved in the conflict. I want to know how far you guys are willing to go on all of this stuff. I think we were absolutely bang on in order to stop Putin just rampaging straight across the country to help out. I still think that we should definitely, for what it's worth, be helping out, and I'm not calling for an end to that. But are we just seeing the drip, drip, drip of something that could lead to British troops on the ground? And I had a Conservative MP on at the top of the show who certainly wasn't against British troops being on the ground, was he? And what does that really mean if you play that out? Kathleen says, I think we should go all the way to help Ukraine. If Putin wins there, where will he stop? And this is the big question, isn't it, actually? Ukraine is fighting the freedom fight for us all. So the least we can do is give them whatever they need. Just a quick another one. Janine says inviting the Ukrainian president to our soil is a dangerous game to play. We're only putting our own security at risk. What sort of message are we sending to Russia? Well, yeah, I get what you're saying, right? But we could also flip that on its head, couldn't we, and say it sends a strong message to Russia that we are in support of Ukraine. But I want to know how far you guys are willing to go. Do you think we would end up putting troops on the ground in Ukraine? You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Loads more to come in the next hour, including that line coming from Downing Street, and live to the Commons as well to talk about the Counter-Terror Prevent scheme with Suella Braverman. Now it's your weather.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office. Wet and windy weather in the far northwest will ease as it spreads south overnight, followed by showers in the north but drier conditions towards the south. It's an active cold front that is bringing some heavy rain and gales to the northwest of Scotland during the rest of the afternoon. That then spreads south. It runs into higher pressure and weakens as it pushes into much of England and Wales. But for a time, some heavy rain and then some hill snow as that front crosses Scotland into Northern Ireland. It really weakens by the time it gets to Northern England and Wales. And for the rest of the UK, it's just an area of cloud and some patchy drizzle. Meanwhile, showers push into northern and western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, and these showers will be falling as hail and sleet and snow over the hills, with some icy patches by dawn towards the north of Scotland. So watch out for those first thing, but otherwise a dull and damp start in the far south, but also a bright start for much of England and Wales as the front clears away and sunny skies return for much of the afternoon. Cloudier for Scotland and Northern Ireland. The blustery showers begin to ease during the afternoon, but we'll see further spots of rain in the west of Scotland and temperatures across the UK 8 to 10 Celsius. Into Thursday evening and some thicker cloud comes along in the northwest. Some high cloud further south, but actually there'll still be a frost in the south under any clear spells, and with light winds as well, of course. It will be a chilly start to Friday in the south, with temperatures away from urban centres, I think, down below zero. Further north, less cold, but a damp start for western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland. And really it stays damp across western Scotland and Northern Ireland throughout much of Friday. The rain coming and going, it will be soggiest over the hills of northwest Scotland. But elsewhere across the UK, it's largely dry. A lot of cloud cover, the best of any brightness into the weekend towards the southeast, and milder for all of us.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236. And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. And coming up, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has made a historic visit to the UK. He addressed Parliament, hailing the strong British character that has been shown in response to the Russian invasion. Oh, yes, and he also had some kind words for a certain former PM.
Boris, you got others united when it seemed absolutely impossible. Thank you.
There we go. Right, his visit has prompted Rishi Sunak to ask the Defence Secretary to investigate what jets the UK could give to Ukraine. So there you go. What jets, what fighter jets we could give to Ukraine. That would be in addition to the PM's plan to help train Ukrainian pilots. I want to know, do you think that we should still be giving support to Ukraine? As people in the UK, they're struggling, aren't they, with the cost of living crisis? But actually, do we need to do it so that Putin doesn't run riot? What extent would you go to support Ukraine? Fighter jets, troops on the ground, GBViews at gbnews.uk. Also this hour, a review into the government's anti-terror strategy has found that it's not doing enough to tackle non-violent Islamist extremism. The government has accepted all 34 recommendations of the long-awaited assessment of the Prevent programme, which aims to stop people turning to terrorism, including a recommendation to treat terrorism as a mental illness. Yeah. We will hear from Home Secretary, who has just spoken in the House of Commons, Suella Braverman. We'll bring you that very, very shortly as I ask, does this report make us soft on terrorism? Do you think terror is a mental illness? And could God soon become gender neutral? Yeah, no, that doesn't mean that Sam Smith has recently changed his name to God, although the way he's carrying on. Bishops are to launch a project that could scrap male pronouns for God, as well as reference to Our Father, in favour of gender neutral or even female alternatives. Get in touch, GBViews at gbnews.uk. The world's gone mad. I'll see you after the headlines.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon to you. The top story on GB News today. The Prime Minister has asked the Defence Secretary which jets it could potentially give to Ukraine. Earlier, the Ukrainian President met with King Charles following a historic address he made to MPs at Westminster Hall. It's his first visit to the country since the start of Russia's invasion. President Zelensky used his visit to urge the UK and Western allies to provide wings for freedom by supplying his Air Force with advanced jets. Later, the two leaders will visit Ukrainian and British troops stationed in Dorset. And in a speech to Parliament, Mr Zelensky thanked the British people for their ongoing support.
The guide smiled and offered me to sit down on this armchair from which war orders had been given. And he asked me, how did I feel? And I said that I certainly felt something. But it is only now that I know what the feeling was. And all Ukrainians know it perfectly well too. It is the feeling of how bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Meanwhile, in Prime Minister's questions, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer pledged his party's support for NATO in standing up to aggressors.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me that whatever differences we may have, no matter what difficulties we face as a country, we in this House have a duty to stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us and support Ukraine's fight for freedom, liberty and victory?
Well, in response, Rishi Sunak announced a stepping up of aid to Ukraine, including plans to train the country's pilots.
But I join with the right honourable gentleman in saying that this House and this country will stand united with Ukraine until we ensure the defeat of Vladimir Putin's unprovoked, unsanctioned aggression, and that we will make sure that Ukraine is not only victorious, but that we bring peace to its people.
Now, governments and organisations from around the world are offering support to Turkey and Syria after the devastating earthquakes that have killed more than 11,000 people. 3 British people are still missing following the disaster. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit on Monday morning, with a second quake a few hours later. The government's pledged support to Turkey's president, who's declared a state of emergency for 3 months in the 10 worst affected cities. President Erdogan has been visiting one of the areas affected, and a 77-strong British search and rescue team is assisting in the country. Now, the former Labour MP Jared O'Mara has been found guilty of 6 counts of fraud from during his time in office. The 41-year-old, who was a Member of Parliament between 2017 and 2019, was on trial for submitting fake invoices to Parliament worth around £24,000 to fund his cocaine habit. A jury cleared him of 2 other charges. Sentencing will take place tomorrow at Leeds Crown Court. The government's anti-terror programme is not doing enough to tackle non-violent Islamist extremism, according to a new report. It also accused the programme of double standards when dealing with the extreme right wing and Islamist ideology. The Home Secretary admitted the scheme needs major reform and should focus on security rather than political correctness. The government has accepted all 34 recommendations made by the review. Now, as you've been hearing, the Church of England could move away from the thousands-year-old tradition of referring to God as inherently male in future. That's after priests within the Church asked to use gender-neutral terms instead. Religious leaders say a new project on gendered language will begin this spring, with any changes to be approved by the Church's decision-making body, the Synod. Royal Mail have revealed the first and second class stamps that will feature a portrait of King Charles today. The design draws inspiration from stamps that featured the late Queen Elizabeth. Royal Mail's director, David Gold, has described it as a defining part of the King's reign. The stamps will go on sale from April. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Patrick.
OK, welcome back, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News. Now, Rishi Sunak's asked the Defence Secretary to investigate what jets the UK could give to Ukraine. That's according to Downing Street. It follows an address to MPs and Lords by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, in which he praised the UK for military aid provided in the war against Russia. He also fueled suggestions that Ukraine could be given Western military jets, thanking the UK in advance for providing powerful planes. Zelensky paid homage to Rishi Sunak for the aid that he's given in his military forces. He also paid particular thanks to former PM Boris Johnson for support for Ukraine.
I have come here and stand before you on behalf of the brave, on behalf of our warriors who are now in the trenches under enemy artillery fire, on behalf of our air gunners and every defender of the sky who protects Ukraine against enemy aircrafts and missiles. Boris, you got others united when it seemed absolutely impossible. Thank you. We know Russia will lose. And we really know the victory will change the world. And this will be a change that the world has long needed. Thank you, Rishi. Thank you very much for this powerful defensive step for tank assistance. Thank you.
Well, there he was. I'm joined now by our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who was one of those who was in Westminster Hall for President Zelensky's speech. And yes, it was a historic moment, wasn't it?
really was quite a moment. This is only the second time that Volodymyr Zelensky has been out of Ukraine since the beginning of the war almost a year ago. He, of course, went to America not long before Christmas. And he spoke for about half an hour. It was incredibly well received in the hall by MPs. A real feeling of solidarity, which began in Prime Minister's questions, which was uncharacteristically not about the differences, but about the fact that both sides of the House are united in wanting to support Ukraine. I think that his acting training really does help him in that he's very good at crafting a speech and ultimately getting what he wants from it. Now, he's come to the UK because, of course, we led the world when Russia invaded Ukraine. We led the world again by being the first to pledge Challenger 2 tanks, and now he's hoping that in coming here, in publicly thanking us in the way that he has, in meeting with the king, in spending time with Rishi Sunak, that we will now move to what Ukraine wants next, which is fighter jets. Now, at the moment, Rishi Sunak has announced that we are now going to be training Ukraine fighter pilots to fly the jets. We haven't yet said that we will give the jets. However, I understand this afternoon from the Prime Minister's spokesman that Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has been asked to look at the possibility of sending jets to Ukraine. And Boris Johnson was personally thanked by Volodymyr Zelensky. He, of course, was there. They have a very strong relationship. And he has been intervening in the last hour or so and saying, again, send the jets to Ukraine. He says we've got 100 Typhoon fighters and 100 Challenger 2 tanks, and he thinks the single best use would be to send them. Of course, it's not for Boris Johnson to decide. It's up to Rishi Sunak, the current Prime Minister, but he very much is determined to uphold the strong bond and strong support that the UK have given to Ukraine so far.
Catherine, thank you very much. Catherine Forster there, our political reporter just from Westminster. Just behind her there, we saw Volodymyr Zelensky give his speech to various different political dignitaries. Now, I'm joined by Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society, Dr. Alan Mendoza. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Alan. It's great to have you on the show. A lot of our viewers are concerned about a potential escalation in our support for Ukraine against Vladimir Putin. So we've had tanks very recently, 14 Challenger 2 tanks, and now Volodymyr Zelensky thanking us in advance for providing fighter jets. It's not confirmed yet, but he's pretty confident about it. Is this a good thing?
Well, I think it is, because the thing we should be most concerned about in this whole conflict is Vladimir Putin winning it. He has started a war of aggression, a needless war, one where there was no basis for what he was doing. And if he's allowed to win that war, frankly, none of us will be safe, because he'll do it again, others will think they can do it again, and the effects of that will be felt by people in this country. By far the best and simplest path for us to follow now is to give Ukraine whatever we can do, even if it is fighter planes next, in order for them to win the war as quickly as possible, push Russia out of Ukraine and get back to the status quo ante, because that is the best way we can guarantee the international system.
I completely get that Vladimir Putin needs to be stopped, and there's no disputing that as far as I'm concerned. OK, I want to make that very, very clear, because there appears to be some people who are calling me some kind of Putin shill online, which I'm certainly not. However, I am concerned about us being dragged into nuclear World War III, right? And I think we all should be quite concerned about that. And one of my big concerns is that the smart money is on the fact that Vladimir Putin will probably make some gains in the coming months as the weather softens over there. And if we've already gone full frontal with tanks and full frontal with fighter jets, what do we do next? Is it troops on the ground? And that's war, isn't it?
No, it won't be troops on the ground, because there's no appetite in Western countries to put actual troops on the ground. Our philosophy has been simple. Ukraine has proven itself capable of defending its territory because of the tremendous will of its people and the sort of courage of its fighters. What it hasn't had is the equipment to do it. And I think what we've been trying to do is supply the equipment, which has made a major difference in Ukraine's ability to resist Russia's aggression. And while you may well be right, there could be in the spring offensive that Putin presumably planned some Russian gains, I think there'll be much bigger chance of Ukraine being able to stop those, or indeed roll them back and push the Russians back to their borders, if we supply the kit to do so. What we do know for certain is if we don't do that, Putin has an advantage in this conflict, and that is not in our interests.
No, indeed. how do you think that the continental European community is behaving? Britain, 2.3 billion quid's worth of military aid to Ukraine in the year just gone, more than any other nation except the United States. We've guaranteed at least the same level in this coming year. We have now added tanks and probably, anyway, about to add fighter jets to that, certainly the training for them. The argument that, well, if we don't stop Putin, then he'll roll through Europe. I'm sorry, but shouldn't our European friends and allies be doing a bit more to make sure they stop getting invaded? Why are we doing it all?
I think, look, you're right to highlight Britain's contribution. Here we are, a proud independent nation, making our weight felt, our traditional weight felt on the world. But you've got to remember, this is a traditional British thing to do. What we tended to do for many, many centuries is to intervene if we see an aggressive power on the continent trying to come forwards to stop that power from gaining too much strength. And this is how we should see this. What we're doing here is pushing back. You're right, though, the Europeans can and should be doing more. Obviously, we've seen that tanks will be arriving from the Germans finally, but a lot of tanks, obviously, in that regard, and they'll be moving forward there. Others have supplied a lot of equipment, but yeah, we are leading, and in fact, what should happen is they should take our lead and follow it and supply as much as they can as well, because that will be the best guarantee for European security, and it'll be much cheaper for them to do it this way than having to face Putin face to face, eyeball to eyeball.
Yeah, I completely get that, absolutely, and we all hope that this stops, frankly, as soon as possible. But at what point do you think the British taxpayer would have a right to stand up and say, we're all skint now, we can't give anyone a pay rise, apparently, of any kind of magnitude whatsoever in our public services, and we're having trouble paying our energy bills, we're having trouble with the cost of living in general, bread has pretty much got security tags on it in shops now when you walk in, for goodness sake. Realistically, should we keep giving a load of money and resources to Ukraine? Do you think the British taxpayer would have an argument there?
Well, the British taxpayer would have an argument there if it wasn't for the fact that Mr. Putin's caused this economic crisis by his energy diplomacy and what's happened. If we don't push him back to his borders, he will be able to, anytime he wants to, use that energy sort of hand grenade and detonate it against us. What this war has certainly done is accelerate our move away from dependency on Russia. That will longer term stabilize prices, enable us to deal with the energy part of the crisis, and will enable us to have more supply elsewhere. The solution isn't to say, we need to stop supplying Ukraine. The solution is we need to get this done as quickly as possible, because that's the best guarantee that we're going to see this country return to prosperity together with Europe.
Just very, very quickly and finally on this, is there not an argument to say that Volodymyr Zelensky should be willing to forego some land and overtly strike a peace deal instead of going around the world asking for money and weapons? Could he not be doing more about that, or is that a moral question, and presumably you don't think Putin would stop anyway, so it'd be worthless? Your view?
Yeah, look, that may well be something that will emerge after spring. But you've got to remember, we're only a year into this conflict. And that year has seen Russia make huge, unwarranted gains of Ukrainian territory. The best chance of suing for peace is if the Russians realize they really can't win this war. And the best chance of that happening is for us to supply Ukraine so that Putin can see the game is up and he himself comes to terms. Otherwise, he won't do so.
Dr. Allen, thank you very, very much. Really enjoyed that. Dr. Allen Mendoza there, the Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. Right now, moving on, the Home Secretary has pledged to overhaul the government's Prevent scheme after an independent review found the organisation was too concerned with treating terrorism as a mental illness rather than a threat. So William Shawcross's review stated that treating terrorism as a mental illness or a social deficiency that can be placated by social services might make acts of extreme violence seem more intelligible to some. Yet, ultimately, this approach fails to grasp the inherently ideological nature of radicalisation and terrorism. So his recommendations also stress that Prevent should go back to first principles and reassert its overall objective of stopping people from becoming terrorists or supporting terrorism. Well, it's a massively hot topic, this, for a variety of different reasons. People are saying the Prevent scheme has maybe gone a little bit woke. It's not there to do that, is it? It's there to really stop terrorism. Some people are saying, well, hey, it disproportionately focuses on radical Islamic terror at a time when the far right is on the rise. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said the review has been mishandled. Shock horror. Here's what the Home Secretary Swallow Braverman, though, had to say in the Commons a little earlier on.
Prevent needs major reform. Prevent needs to better understand the threats we face and the ideology underpinning them. 80% of counter-terrorism police networks' live investigations are Islamist. MI5 are clear that Islamist terrorism remains our predominant threat, accounting for 75% of their caseload. Yet only 16% of Prevent referrals in 2021-22 were Islamist. Prevent has shown cultural timidity and an institutional hesitancy to tackle Islamism for fear of the charge of Islamophobia. The truth is, there is nothing anti-Muslim about tackling Islamism. And we must continue to work closely with Muslim communities if we are to do so effectively.
Well, there we go. Suella Braverman there, our Home Secretary, in the Commons a little earlier on. I'm joined now by Nick Allwood, former National Coordinator, Counter-Terrorism Policing. Great stuff. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Well, huge concerns then that the very thing that we're supposed to put in place to tackle, amongst other forms of terrorism, but radical Islamist terrorism, is not fit for purpose. Your views?
So I think what is really coming through here is that there is some change needed. I fundamentally disagree with the Home Secretary that radical reform or radical overhaul is required. I also think that Sir William Shawcross's report does have some deficiencies in it. I think it takes a very short-term, here and now view, and the whole meaning of the word prevent is to stop stuff happening in the future. So you're absolutely right to highlight that the majority of investigations currently involve extremist Islamist beliefs, but that will change over time. That will change according to generational differences as well. But
can I just interject here? Because I spoke to an imam last night, and I spoke to an individual who was one of the advisors for Prevent earlier on, and both of them were absolutely adamant to me that this is anti-Muslim to its core, and that even the people who are now writing the report on Prevent, that's anti-Muslim to its core. And is it about time that people just stood up to this nonsense and just said, actually, if you really drill down into it, unfortunately, the majority of the terror threat that this country is facing at the moment is from radical Islamism, and we have even given money to some groups as part of the Prevent scheme who've then taken that money and gone on to say that the Taliban might be a good thing. It isn't anti-Muslim, we're just looking out for ourselves.
Yeah, so look, one of the things we've got to completely disconnect is Islam and Islamist extremism. They are fundamentally different things, and people, we do have to be cautious of our language. It is offensive, and we don't need to be offensive to each other around these things. But to be absolutely specific around your question, Patrick, what we can't do is be shy or hesitant around tackling the threats that we face. And
but
actually, the fact that 80% of live investigations do involve investigations into radical Islamists is testament to the fact that we don't shy away from doing that. But the point about Prevent is getting ahead of it becoming a problem in the first instance. And the one thing that I took myself from the Shawcross report was this idea that over 50% of the referrals should probably have gone to other mental health services. And what this really demonstrates is a much, much wider problem in social healthcare and policing, whereby the problems of society are being scooped up in one big lump and dumped into the lap of the police.
Yes. However, there are, I think anyway, people hiding behind a cloak of fake vulnerability when it comes to crimes, not just terrorism, but crimes in general. And is it not, Nick, potentially quite easy these days to go, oh, look, I'm very sorry that I pledged allegiance to ISIS and that I'd planned on carrying out some kind of horrific terror attack in this country, but I was 16 years old at the time and I'd come from a broken home and my mental health was all over the place, and we just go, oh, OK, all right, have a hug.
Well, it would appear that we don't go, OK, have a hug. I mean, and Shamima Begum is probably the best example of that, a more extreme reaction to somebody in that very situation you've described there, Patrick, couldn't be demonstrated. But look, here's the reality of this is not a single societal or judicial issue. What you've just described there strikes at the heart of juvenile versus adult culpability and ability to understand right from wrong. And we do have strong precedents in the UK around that. So you're not really treated as knowing right from wrong, and for sure, until you're over the age of 14. And so I don't think it would be a case that younger people who are saying, "Oh, I think it was just a mistake, and I was led astray by some really bad people." The old big boys maybe do it defence. I don't think that does hold true, and the number of juveniles that are being prosecuted is indicative of that. But the bit that we've got to get right is who should be coming into these programs, because at the moment, 6,000 people coming into a program, 3,000 shouldn't have been there. That is an awful lot of money being squandered on an awful lot of people that don't need the support that these programs are intended to deliver.
OK, Nick, thank you very much. Nick Aldwood there, former National Coordinator, Counter-Terrorism Policing. Interesting insight, that, isn't it? Well, look, you're with me, Patrick Christys on GB News. Coming up, the devastating earthquake on the border of Turkey and Syria has now sadly killed more than 11,000 people as bad weather hinders the rescue effort. We will cross to an organisation looking to make a difference. And Meghan Markle faces a legal showdown with her sister. You hate to see it, don't you? And may have to appear in court to face allegations that she told lies about her rags to riches story. Oh no, it couldn't all be lies, could it? Back in a moment.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back. Now, the death toll of the 7.8 magnitude earthquake has reached more than 11,000 now across Turkey and Syria. The cold weather and destroyed infrastructure, such as damaged railway tracks, are currently hindering search and rescue attempts. And for Syria, this is being referred to as a crisis within a crisis, as almost 300 people have been displaced, 300,000, that should say. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has said that the government is in touch with the Turkish and Syrian authorities and that the UK is providing all of the assistance which is being required of us. Let's get more on that assistance coming from the UK, from GB News reporter Ray Addison. Ray, thank you very much. So, where are you? What's going on?
Hey there, Patrick. Yes, I'm in North London, in Enfield, here at the British Levy Federation, and it's here that the Turkish community is coming together to collect and send essential aid to Turkey, to the people who need it most. Now, of course, you mentioned that death toll of more than 11,000. There's fears here among the community. They're telling me they feel it could be 4 or 5 times as high as that number. You might be able to see just behind me here the human chain. They're putting together all of those boxes, those supplies, and putting them into the very first van which will be sending those supplies to Turkey. Now, Sevgi is a member of the community here. She joins me now. Sevgi, what's your experience? How's your family been impacted by this disaster?
So my mum's cousin lives in Kahramanmaraş. She's trapped in her garage right now. She had to escape her home. She's there with her children. She tries to go into her house to get food time to time, and then she goes back into her garage. They're trapped there. There's no support. Nobody's going to do anything for them there. The weather condition is really bad. There's a storm. It's snowing. It's freezing. She messages us sometimes, and she says that her animals are about to die because of the condition, and she can't do anything to help. I also have a 12-year-old relative. She's stuck under the rubble. We don't know. We're not even sure if it's her or not. We're assuming that it's her because it's the same building, and yeah, we're just waiting for news.
They can hear her calling from the rubble.
They can hear a girl calling from the rubble, yeah, and we're not sure if it's her, but yeah.
Now, in terms of the help that you're providing here at the Federation, you've been asking people for donations. What kind of supplies do you need, and where are you sending it?
We're sending it to all of the cities that have been affected by the earthquake. There's two main cities that still need support. It's Kahramanmaraş, Elbistan and Hatay. We're in contact with people there, and they're saying that there's no support at all. They still need people to go and help them. In most areas, I think teams around the world have gone to support, but there's still some areas that need the help. People are trying to save people from under the rubble with their bare hands right now.
Sevgi, thank you very much for joining us. Just some of the things that I know that you've been asking local community members to provide: baby bottles, hot water flasks as well, hygiene products, flashlights, batteries, power banks, heat packs, and of course, Patrick, those all-important vital sleeping bags as well.
Yes, indeed. Ray, thank you very much. That's, of course, Ray Addison there, GB News' reporter. From the scene, as it were, of part of the relief effort. We're trying to get all the equipment and necessary things that we can get over to that part of the world. Ray, thank you very much. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Meghan Markle faces a legal showdown with her sister and may have to appear in court to face allegations that she told lies about her rags to riches story. Oh, my days, I can't wait. But first, it's your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories this hour. The Prime Minister has asked the Defence Secretary which UK military jets could potentially be donated in support of Ukraine. Earlier today, King Charles met with Ukraine's President Zelensky at Buckingham Palace following his historic address to MPs at Westminster Hall. It's President Zelensky's first visit to the country since the start of Russia's invasion a year ago. And he's using his visit to urge the UK and Western allies to provide what he's called wings for freedom by supplying his Air Force with advanced air power. Later, the two leaders will visit Ukrainian and British troops stationed in Dorset. In his speech to Parliament, President Zelensky thanked the British people for their ongoing support.
The guide smiled and offered me to sit down on this armchair from which war orders had been given. And he asked me, how did I feel? And I said that I certainly felt something. But it is only now that I know what the feeling was. And all Ukrainians know it perfectly well too. It is the feeling of how bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Well, governments and organisations around the world are offering support to Turkey and Syria after two devastating earthquakes killed more than 11,000 people. 3 British people are still missing following the disaster. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit on Monday morning. A second quake followed just a few hours later. The government's pledged support to Turkey's President Erdogan, who's declared a state of emergency for 3 months in the 10 worst affected cities. And President Erdogan has been out visiting one of the areas affected today, meeting survivors and emergency crews who are working all hours in sub-zero temperatures. A British search and rescue team is also still helping to locate those still alive in the rubble. The Home Secretary says the government's anti-terror prevent programme needs a major reform after a review found the programme's not doing enough to tackle non-violent Islamist extremism. Suella Braverman says the government needs to better understand the threats and ideology underpinning them. The Home Office has accepted all 34 recommendations. The former Labour MP Jared Amara has been found guilty of 6 counts of fraud from his time in office. The 41-year-old, who was a Member of Parliament between 2017 and 2019, was on trial for submitting fake invoices to Parliament worth around £24,000 to fund his cocaine habit. A jury cleared him of 2 other charges. Sentencing will take place at Leeds Crown Court tomorrow. Those are the headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
Right, OK, so Meghan Markle has suffered a major blow to avoid giving evidence in a court case brought against her by her half-sister. Samantha, the eldest daughter of Thomas Markle, is seeking $75,000 in damages. That's around £57,000, apparently, over claims made by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex in their interview with Oprah Winfrey back in 2021. Meghan has been accused of telling false and malicious lies regarding a rags-to-royalty story, which she has alleged subjected her to humiliation, shame and hatred on a worldwide scale. Joining me now is the royal commentator and writer Michael Cole. Michael, look, God, poor Meghan, you know, she's going to have to now try to back up some of the things she says, and your heart bleeds, I imagine.
Patrick, this is a classic case of the biter bit, because in the past, Meghan has been highly litigious, suing newspapers, and now she finds a member of her own family suing her, as you say, for $75,000, about £62,000, and demanding the answers to 38 questions, which Samantha, there on the left of the screen, there she is again, wants to put to her half-sister, quite a few years younger than her, Meghan, and she wants to do that in court by means of a deposition where questions are asked and the answers are written down ahead of a court case. Meghan, for her part, wants the case to be dismissed. I think it's worth saying that the biter being bit, I mean, Meghan has not been slow in making unkind and wounding allegations against her husband's family, but of her own family, she's only on speaking terms with her mother, Doria, and one niece. The others are not on speaking terms with her, which maybe tells you, or maybe doesn't tell you, something about the dynamic within the Markle family.
Yes, indeed. I do find that interesting in itself, you know, OK, I mean, all families have feuds, there's no doubt about that, but the reality is only a couple of them actually talking to
facing members of her own family. One of the things that apparently Samantha, who, as you said, feels that she's been humiliated, shamed, and held up to hatred by her younger half-sister. One of the things that Samantha feels is that when Meghan said she was her father's only child, well, she seemed to forget about her siblings, her half-brother and her half-sister. So this is an ugly kettle of fish, and one that will be played out in a Florida courtroom. or not. It's certainly uncomfortable for them, but, you know, the Montecino money machine on the mountaintop in California,
I just
wonder... is probably 75,000 is probably chicken feed to them.
Well, yes, but just quickly, Michael, I do wonder whether or not now this is, frankly, what was always going to happen. You can only construct such a narrative, and I want to just emphasise here, it's if it was built on a tissue of lies, which, of course, Meghan Markle would absolutely deny. If it is, at some point, that's going to come crumbling down, because life, Michael, is not a Hollywood movie, is it? Life is not a little children's princess story about, you know, how she became a princess and all of this. If she has told mistruths, then Prince Harry's defence, for example, of, well, my recollection of everything, even if it's false, is still just as true as the truth. Well, welcome to a courtroom where that isn't the case.
Well, that couldn't have been summarized better, but I just fall back on Leo Tolstoy, the famous Russian writer, who said happy families are all the same and unhappy families are all unhappy in very, very different ways. Well, this is a very different way of going away about things. Americans tend to be litigious. They tend to sue if their coffee is hot enough or if it's not hot enough. That's what they do. And one hopes that this can actually resolve things, because eventually in both these families, the royal family and the Markle family, there has got to be some resolution. People cannot go to their graves with things unsaid.
No, exactly. Michael, thank you very much. Michael Cole there, one of the world-renowned royal commentators and royal experts. Look, thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. I'll be back in just a couple of minutes. We're going to be talking about whether or not God is indeed a man, a woman, or something in between, because that appears to be the latest push from the Church of England. Do they actually want to question now God's gender and turn him into, I don't know, maybe something like Sam Smith? I'll be back in a sec.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you know, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
OK, welcome back, everybody. It's Patrick Christys here on GB News. Now, just before we go to our next topic, I'm just going to delve into the world of my inbox, because I've been asking you quite a lot of questions throughout the course of the show, mainly focusing around Zelensky, his historic visit to Britain. He's met with the King, he's met with Rishi Sunak, he spoke to MPs and a variety of different dignitaries and also praised Boris Johnson, etc. And I've basically been asking you whether or not you think we should go ahead and give them things like fighter jets, and what's the next step as well. Look, again, for the avoidance of doubt, I think absolutely we were right, of course, to stand up to Vladimir Putin when he first rolled the tanks in. But now we are in a situation, possibly, some would say, where once you've gone tanks, which we did recently, once we've gone fighter jets, once we've gone £2.3 billion and potentially another £2.3 billion as well, what is the next step when it comes to helping Ukraine defend itself against Vladimir Putin? Well, possibly, is it troops on the ground? Dare I say, maybe it is. And would you be OK with that? I just want to know your views, because a lot of you, like, for example, Gavin, who is emailed in now, gbviews@gbnews.uk, he says, just do whatever it takes. Just do absolutely whatever it takes to stop Vladimir Putin. And people would, I think, go the whole hog. I spoke to a Conservative MP earlier on, and that's absolutely fair enough if that's your view. I would be concerned about the potential for massive escalation. But then, of course, the argument against that is, well, Putin won't stop anyway. And that is why some people are saying we can't actually even try to broker some kind of peace deal, because it wouldn't be worth the paper that it's written on. So there's absolutely no point in it. A lot of you still getting in touch, though, on a topic that we're going to go and talk on very shortly with a guest. And it is about the fact that apparently now God might not be a man, he might not even be a woman, it might be something in between. Will we be making God gender neutral? In my eyes, God is not a father, but then I am not a believer in that God is man or being. That is according to Steve. Yes, believe it or not, the Church of England might be about to go even woker now and basically debate whether or not God actually has a gender at all. I spoke to Gavin Ashenden earlier on, who is indeed a Catholic layman. And Gavin said that basically God is self-identified as well. So there we go. Anyway, I am going to be talking to a particular guest on that now. It would be nice if at some point someone told me who that was, to talk about the fact that the Church of England is about to basically say that God maybe is indeed a man or a woman. You know what? We'll hold that for a second, ladies and gentlemen. We will just hold that for a second, and I will endeavour to hear more from you in the inbox. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Why not stick on Zelensky? Patrick, I agree with you, says Sally. All the military experts I have listened to say that Putin is more likely to use his nuclear weapons on us if he is losing. Britain has done enough, they say. Well, OK, fair enough. I am concerned that what's going to end up happening is that we do go full frontal in it, and then China maybe ends up going to something like Taiwan as well, and then we are properly in World War III. So I do believe I have a couple of guests on this right now. I believe one of them's called Tim, and it might be nice if we went to him. There we go. Right, thank you very much, Martin. Sorry, we are having some slightly minor tech issues here, unfortunately. Like I've said, it would be nice if somebody told me exactly who you were, but there we go. So, Tim, thank you very much for joining me. What's your view on whether or not God is a man or a woman? OK, I'm not sure anyone can actually hear them. So that is a bit of a shame. Sorry, everyone who's watching at home or listening on radio here. We are clearly having some rather major technical problems there. But you know what? We're just going to draw a line under this. I'm going to rip the running order up, and I'm just going to basically look straight down the barrel and talk to you. Thank you very much, everyone who is getting in touch. And the Zelensky issue has, frankly, caused, well, a lot of back and forth online. Some people are saying that they're a little bit sick and tired of us giving a load of money there. Other people saying it's necessary. And I'm going to read you some facts and figures out on this now, because in total the UK has provided £2.3 billion of military aid to Ukraine in 2022, more than any other nation other than the United States, and the government has committed to sustain the same level of funding in 2023. So quite a lot of money, especially in the middle of a cost of living crisis. But frankly, war does cost money. And according to one Conservative MP that I had on earlier in the show, he was saying, well, this is very much our war now. And I know a lot of you share that view. UK armed forces have trained thousands of personnel from the armed forces of Ukraine. So we are, and we continue to do, which is train a lot of Ukrainian soldiers right here in the UK. That, I think, makes absolute sense. Whatever we can do to try to help them basically defend themselves would, I think, be a good thing. UK Armed Forces are indeed training them. Specialist training has also been conducted on equipment donated to Ukraine. So now NATO standard fighter jets could well end up being the thing. And this is really where we're at today. And this is a massive concern for people, I think, which is that whether or not we should actually be providing fighter jets of our own. Volodymyr Zelensky did say himself, didn't he, in advance, thank you very much, Britain, for providing these fighter jets. We haven't actually technically agreed to that. Some people would think that that is a massive, massive escalation on top of the Challenger tanks, on top of the rocket launch systems. Look, mixed views on this, but I know for a fact a lot of people certainly do not want Putin to just run rampage across Europe and indeed across Ukraine. Look, we're going to go to a very quick break. We're going to go to the weather. And when we come back, well, hopefully things are much better.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Oh, Eamon.
Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office. Wet and windy weather in the far northwest will ease as it spreads south overnight, followed by showers in the north but drier conditions towards the south. It's an active cold front that is bringing some heavy rain and gales to the northwest of Scotland during the rest of the afternoon. That then spreads south. It runs into higher pressure and weakens as it pushes into much of England and Wales. But for a time, some heavy rain and then some hill snow as that front crosses Scotland into Northern Ireland. It really weakens by the time it gets to Northern England and Wales, and for the rest of the UK, it's just an area of cloud and some patchy drizzle. Meanwhile, showers push into northern and western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, and these showers will be falling as hail and sleet and snow over the hills, with some icy patches by dawn towards the north of Scotland. So watch out for those first thing, but otherwise a dull and damp start in the far south, but also a bright start for much of England and Wales as the front clears away and sunny skies return for much of the afternoon. Cloudier for Scotland and Northern Ireland. The blustery showers begin to ease during the afternoon, but we'll see further spots of rain in the west of Scotland and temperatures across the UK 8 to 10 Celsius. Into Thursday evening and some thicker cloud comes along in the northwest. Some high cloud further south, but actually there'll still be a frost in the south under any clear spells, and with light winds as well, of course. It will be a chilly start to Friday in the south, with temperatures away from urban centres, I think, down below zero. Further north, less cold, but a damp start for western Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland. And really it stays damp across western Scotland and Northern Ireland throughout much of Friday. The rain coming and going, it will be soggiest over the hills of northwest Scotland. But elsewhere across the UK, it's largely dry. A lot of cloud cover, the best of any brightness into the weekend towards the southeast, and milder for all of us.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Right, welcome back, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News. Now, protests have taken place against the Church of England's offer of prayers of blessings for same-sex couples, calling them an insult and not sufficient. So the synod, often thought of as the Church's parliament, is preparing for a historic vote on the matter this week, and attention is turning to God's gender. And this, I think, is a particularly juicy bit. Priests are considering stopping using gendered language such as he and him. A new project looking into the use of more inclusive language will begin in the spring, with any challenges or indeed changes marking a departure from the traditional Jewish and Christian teachings dating back millennia. Joining me now, and hopefully this time I will be able to either see or hear them, to discuss this is the Head of Public Policy at Christian Concern, Tim Deap. This already looks better. And Martine Oborne as well, who is the Vicar at St Michael's in Chiswick and also the Chair of the National Campaign Group for Gender Equality in the Church of England, Women and the Church. Right, this is... Well, I think we're off to a flyer now. Sorry about this. I could not see or hear you earlier on, so apologies about that. I had no idea who I was talking to. Tim, I will start with you still this time. Tim Deap there is Head of Public Policy at Christian Concern. Is God a man or a woman?
Well, Jesus was a man, wasn't he, Patrick? So Jesus was born as a man, lived as a man, died as a man, and he even rose from the dead as a man as well. So clearly he was a man, and he called his Father, Father, didn't he? And he said we should pray our Father. And God is revealed then as a Trinity, Father, Son, and
All right,
Holy
ladies and
Spirit.
gentlemen, I'm going to have to just cut in it because I don't really think we can hear Tim, unfortunately. I'm very, very sorry about this, everyone who's watching, and indeed our guests there. Martine, can I just try you for the avoidance of it being a total washout?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
No, I can't, I'm afraid. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very sorry about this. I'm afraid we're going to have to just move on from that entirely. It was a valiant effort, but very, very sorry. Look, our main topics of discussion today on that one as well is whether or not you think that God is indeed a man or a woman. Jim has been on. For God's sake, he says, who in their right minds thinks that we or our world or our universe and everything in it was created by a man or a woman or anything in between, for that matter? Jim there going full frontal atheist when it comes to all of that stuff. Lots of you have been getting in touch on that idea that the church is indeed going woke. And people are saying, why do we need to meddle in this stuff now? What would it do to the Lord's Prayer, for example? But also the big one that we've been leading with throughout the course of the day. And we are hoping as well, shortly anyway, we might hear from Rishi Sunak and Volodymyr Zelensky themselves, maybe, just maybe, in the next few minutes. Rumours, rumblings of some kind of press conference. We'll have to wait and see about that. I have been asking whether or not you think we should go even further with our support for Ukraine, and it's a mixed bag, to say the least. We are supposedly about to definitely train fighter pilots to fight NATO standard jets. My concern would be that does that mean that NATO is absolutely 100% now at war with Russia? What would that mean? Dear Patrick, I believe that we only have around 100 RAF Typhoons, and that's just from Nick, and he is saying that actually, realistically, maybe enough is enough. But I know a lot of you have a very strong feeling on this and that we should do even more and do whatever we can to stop Putin running roughshod across Ukraine and indeed Europe, and I'm very sympathetic to that view. It's why it's such a good talking point, because there are two very, very distinct sides on it. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Keep your views coming in. Look, I'll be back in, well, frankly, not too long, actually, but thank you very much, everybody who's been bearing with us here. Zelensky to visit the UK. We're talking about whether or not the church is going woke, and yes, our prevent scheme apparently is too soft on terrorists. Make sure you stay tuned and keep your views coming in. GBViews at gbnews.uk. I'm all yours in just a couple of minutes.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
and right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, everybody. You're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News, and coming up, we'll be crossing live to Dorset, where President Zelensky is meeting members of the British military.
Boris, you got others united when it seemed absolutely impossible. Thank you.
Yes, well, in a historic visit to the UK, the Ukrainian president has addressed Parliament, hailing the strong British character that had been shown in response to the Russian invasion. He also had some very kind words for former Prime Minister Boris Johnson as well. Remember him? And in this hour, we're expecting to cross live to Dorset. Yes, I've already told you about that, where we'll be talking about whether or not we're going to be ending up sending fighter jets to Ukraine, as it currently stands anyway. We're just sending the people who might be able to teach the other people how to fly them. But I want to know, do you think we should still be giving support to Ukraine? I suspect most people think yes, but how much now? How much? Are we poking the Russian bear? Should we not care about that? And should we just plough on regardless? A range of views, and they are coming in thick and fast. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Also this hour, a review into the government's anti-terror strategy has found it's not doing enough to tackle non-violent Islamist extremism. The government has accepted all 34 recommendations of the long-awaited assessment of the PREVENT programme, which aims to stop people turning to terrorism. That includes a recommendation, get this, to treat terrorism as a mental illness. So, 2 big ones for you over the course of this hour, ladies and gentlemen. Do you think we should continue to support Ukraine militarily to the extent that we are? Would you put troops on the ground? Is basically what I really want to know. Would you go that far? And do you think terrorism should be treated as a mental illness? GB Views at gbnews.uk. But right now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to throw you over to get your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you, and good evening to you. The top story on GB News today, the Prime Minister has asked the Defence Secretary which UK military jets could be donated in support of Ukraine. Earlier today, King Charles welcomed President Zelensky to Buckingham Palace following the Ukrainian leader's historic address to MPs at Westminster Hall. It's President Zelensky's first visit to the country since the start of Russia's invasion a year ago. And he's using his visit to urge the UK and Western allies to provide what he called wings for freedom by supplying his air force with advanced air power. The two leaders have now arrived in Dorset. They're due to meet Ukrainian troops being trained by the British Army. Earlier on today, in a speech to Parliament, President Zelensky thanked the British people for their ongoing support.
The guide smiled and offered me to sit down on this armchair from which war orders had been given. And he asked me, how did I feel? And I said that I certainly felt something. But it is only now that I know what the feeling was. And all Ukrainians know it perfectly well too. It is the feeling of how bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
And just a little bit more detail for you on that surprise visit to Salisbury Plain to troops there at Lulworth Camp. We understand, as we said, the Prime Minister and President Zelensky have landed in their helicopter at Lulworth Camp. They're going to be meeting Ukrainian troops being trained by the British Army. We'll bring you more detail on that as we get it. In the meantime, at Prime Minister's Questions today, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, pledged his party's support for NATO in standing up to aggressors.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me that whatever differences we may have, no matter what difficulties we face as a country, we in this House have a duty to stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us and support Ukraine's fight for freedom, liberty and victory?
Well, in response, Rishi Sunak earlier announced a stepping up of aid to Ukraine as well, including plans to train the country's pilots.
But I join with the right honourable gentleman in saying that this House and this country will stand united with Ukraine until we ensure the defeat of Vladimir Putin's unprovoked, unsanctioned aggression, and that we will make sure that Ukraine is not only victorious, but that we bring peace to its people.
Meanwhile, governments and organisations around the world are offering support to Turkey and Syria after two devastating earthquakes killed more than 11,000 people. The Foreign Office says 3 British people are still missing following the disaster, and the UK government has pledged support to Turkey's President Erdogan, who's declared a state of emergency for 3 months in the 10 worst affected cities. He's been meeting survivors and emergency crews that are working hard to save lives in sub-zero temperatures, and a British team with 4 search and rescue dogs have appeared on the scene from yesterday to help locate quake survivors using their specialist search and rescue equipment. Now, international investigators say there are strong indications that the Russian President Vladimir Putin supplied the missile which downed a Malaysia Airlines flight in 2014. 298 people lost their lives in that disaster, and it happened over Ukrainian territory. Investigators, though, are also saying there isn't enough evidence to lead to a criminal conviction, so they've ended their probe without further prosecutions. Russia has denied any wrongdoing. Here, the former Labour MP Jared O'Mara has been found guilty of 6 counts of fraud from during his time in office. The 41-year-old, who was an MP between 2017 and 2019, was on trial for submitting fake invoices to Parliament worth around £24,000 to fund his cocaine habit. A jury cleared him of 2 other charges. Sentencing will take place tomorrow at Leeds Crown Court. The government's anti-terror programme is not doing enough to tackle non-violent Islamist extremism, according to a new report. It's also accused the programme of double standards when dealing with the extreme right-wing and Islamist ideology. The Home Secretary admitted the scheme needs major reform and will now focus on security rather than political correctness. The government has accepted all 34 recommendations made by the review. The Church of England could potentially move away from the 1,000-year-old tradition of referring to God as inherently male in future. That's after priests within the Church asked to use gender-neutral terms instead. Religious leaders say a new project on gendered language will begin this spring, with any changes to be approved by the Church's decision-making body, the Synod. You're up to date on GB News. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
All right, people, well, any moment now we will be going live to Dorset, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be speaking. He's been to the UK today. Earlier, he gave a major speech to MPs and the Lords. He's also met King Charles. Zelensky also fueled suggestions that Ukraine could be given Western military jets, thanking the UK in advance for providing powerful planes. I'm joined now by our political reporter, Catherine Forster, who was one of those who was actually in Westminster Hall for Zelensky's speech. Catherine, thank you very much. It seemed a little bit odd because we haven't committed to that yet. You don't think Zelensky was trying to bounce us into giving him jets, do you?
Well, certainly, I think he has come to the UK. This is only his second visit to a country outside of Ukraine since the invasion. He went to the States late last year. But he's come, hasn't he, because he wants something from us, and we have led the West since the invasion in our response and set an example. So obviously he's very grateful, and he achieved the seemingly impossible of uniting all sides of Westminster in support of him, but he wants the planes. He's got the tanks. That was the last issue on which he was pushing and pushing and pushing, and that has been agreed, and now he's come to say thank you very much. They are deeply, deeply grateful, and to stress the bond that we have with Ukraine, but also, of course, because he's hoping that in coming here, meeting Rishi Sunak, going to Downing Street, speaking to Parliament, having tea with the King, going and speaking to troops, that he can give us that little nudge to get fighter jets from us. Now, Rishi Sunak has announced today that we are going to train Ukrainian fighter pilots. That's going to start as soon as possible. They're saying hopefully by the spring they'll be able to come and start to train them to use these planes. But the government has made no commitment to sending actual jets at the moment. And of course, they're stressing you've got to train the people to use them first. There's no good sending planes till people can use them. The Prime Minister's spokesman has said, though, that Rishi Sunak has asked Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, to look at what jets could potentially be sent. So a decision hasn't been taken, but you can see the direction of travel here. Boris Johnson has been intervening again, saying that we should be sending the planes. He said we've got 100 Typhoon jets, that we've got 100 Challenger 2 tanks, that he can see no better use for them than sending them to Ukraine. But of course, it's not his call because he's not currently the Prime Minister. He and Volodymyr Zelensky, though, clearly have a very strong bond. And this is Boris Johnson's legacy that he's really looking to protect. And so far, it does seem that Rishi Sunak is 100% on board with giving Ukraine the support that they say they need. But the jets, well, let's wait and see.
Yes, indeed. Look, Catherine, thank you very much. Very, very well summarised. That's Catherine Forster there, who is our political reporter, who's been in Westminster. Now, she was there to actually see first-hand, up close and personal, Volodymyr Zelensky's speech. He's an incredibly inspiring guy, isn't he, Zelensky? There's no doubt about that. And, again, it's fascinating because there are such strong views on either side of this, and it means, frankly, that it's obviously a very good question to ask. How far are you willing to go when it comes to supporting Ukraine militarily? There are people who completely 100%, and I understand this view, who think we should give them whatever they need, even up to and including putting British troops actually physically on the ground with guns in their hands, because Putin is mad, he's lost the plot, he's going to nuke us all to death, and if we don't stop him now, then we'll never stop him at all. There are people who think that, absolutely. There are also people who think, well, actually, hang on a minute, we have sent 2.3 billion quid already. We're going to send another 2.3 billion quid this year. We are about to, if Zelensky is right, give him actual fighter jets. We're certainly training people to fly NATO-standard fighter jets, and we've already given tanks. Is this some kind of escalation? Where will this end for us? And they are concerned that this might, frankly, bankrupt the country and just end up with Vladimir Putin getting incredibly angry, and that ensures nuclear war. Anyway, the truth, I suspect, is possibly somewhere in the middle. There are also people, and I think there's some merit in this argument, by the way, which is it's great that we're giving a load of stuff to Ukraine, and potentially we could even continue to do that. And yes, maybe we should even give them fighter jets as well. But what are our European friends and supposedly allies on the continent doing compared to us? Are they doing enough? They're a bit slow off the mark. And I can't help but remind myself of when Putin initially rolled the tanks in. And the European Union especially seemed quite content to allow Putin to have Ukraine and then deal with the humanitarian crisis after it, i.e. throw their arms around every single Ukrainian refugee who'd managed to make it out alive. That, I think we were right to say, is certainly not good enough. But how far are you willing to go? And that's what I'm asking you. GBViews at gbnews.uk. I'm joined now by former British Army Colonel Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. Hamish, thank you so much. Do you think we will give them actual fighter jets, and is that a good thing?
Good afternoon, Patrick. Well, I think, first of all, we should give them absolutely everything we can to ensure that they prevail. You talk about British boots on the ground and all the rest of it. Absolutely, we want to avoid that at all costs, but we mustn't take anything off the table. When it comes to jets, yeah, I think it makes absolute sense to give them jets and to give them British jets if necessary. Now, the Royal Air Force has more fighter jets than it has pilots. The Ukraine Air Force has more pilots than it has fighter jets. Now, I know I'm a tank expert. I can tell you all about tanks. I'm not an expert in flying these fighter jets. And I accept that it'll take, at least 12 months to convert those Ukrainian pilots onto NATO jets. But they are a key part, what we call air power, a key part of the combined all-arms battle. We've given them some tanks. I agree with Boris. We should give them everything we've got, because quite frankly, British fighter jets and British tanks stuck in hangars in the UK are not going to defeat Putin. And if we can enable the Ukrainians to do that, all the better. So, yeah, I think we need to make the decision now to give them fighter jets, which seems to have been done, because we don't want to delay as we did with tanks. Had we given them tanks 6 to 9 months ago, we might not be in this position now of Ukraine fighting for its survival.
However, I'm slightly concerned about the direction of travel. Look, we all want this thing over with the best possible result, goes without saying. But the smart money is on that Vladimir Putin and his forces might make some gains as the weather thaws a little bit in Ukraine, and there'll be some kind of back and forth. Well, if we've gone tanks at the minute and if we've gone jets at the moment, it isn't a massive leap to think that they are rolling the wicket for a full-scale conflict, militarily, man-to-man, with Russia. And I think people back here are rightly quite concerned that that is what's on the table here.
Well, it is a full-scale conflict at the moment between Ukraine and Russia. Some of the most deadly and ferocious fighting we've seen since probably the First World War, with thousands of people dying. The key thing about offering jets is it makes a real commitment to Ukraine for the long haul. Russia is throwing thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands soldiers into the battle to try and elongate the battle, because Russia doesn't care about casualties or collateral damage. And at the moment, they are just fighting like the First World War, throwing soldiers into the battle, hoping that Ukraine will run out of ammunition. And that's what their bloggers are saying. So to up it with the Western armor and Western technology, which is making such a difference in Ukraine, the Western tanks will give a significant advantage. Hopefully the first ones will become operational at the end of March. And I am only a few miles away in Dorset, from where those people are being trained, and Zelensky and our own Prime Minister are at the moment. I've heard them firing, and I can also hear the training on Salisbury Plain. So it is key we get them this modern Western kit that will give them the advantage so that the Ukrainians can defeat Russia in Ukraine rather than allowing this war to spill into Europe, where all of us will get involved. So really it is escalating to de-escalate. And the more we can give the Ukrainians, the better.
Just quickly and finally on this, Hamish, then I suppose this does really centre around whether or not you think that Putin would stop if he took Ukraine, whether or not you think any kind of peace deal whatsoever would be worth the paper it's written on. It sounds to me as though you think that, in reality, Putin would not stop at Ukraine, therefore we need to stop him now.
Yeah, absolutely. Why would he have, 150,000 dead, in Ukraine and basically write off most of his conventional army and then stop? He is after the greater Russia. He sees himself as the modern Peter the Great, who basically, took most of Europe for greater Russia. So there is no way it would appear, certainly, better commentators on history than me would suggest he wouldn't stop at Ukraine. We must, because, of course, the next stage from Ukraine is into a NATO country. And, of course, that would get us all involved under the Article 5 agreement, where attack on one is an attack on all. So let's make them prevail. The Ukrainians there is, give them the fighters if they need it, give them the tanks, and give them all the support we can. Because as everybody's seen today, Zelensky is an extraordinary leader leading an extraordinary country. And I think we can learn a lot from his resolve and their resolve.
Okay. Hamish, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Hamish de Bretton-Gordon there is a former British Army colonel. And look, this epitomises exactly where I can see, really, that most of you, our viewers and listeners, are out on this. It's the inbox, gbviews@gbnews.uk. John says, I personally think this could drag us into war by giving Ukraine what we're giving them, and he's not in favour of it. But then literally the email below from Evelyn, he says, 100%, give them absolutely everything that they need. So there you go. Very much a split issue when it comes to the Ukraine support. But moving on from that now, the Home Secretary has pledged to overhaul the government's Prevent scheme after an independent review found the organisation was too concerned with treating terrorism as a mental illness rather than a threat. William Shawcross's review stated that treating terrorism as a mental illness or a social deficiency that can be placated by social services might make acts of extreme violence seem more intelligible to some. Yet, ultimately, this approach fails to grasp the inherently ideological nature of radicalisation and terrorism. His recommendations also stress that Prevent should go back to first principles, i.e. what it was designed to do, and reassert its overall objective of stopping people from becoming terrorists or supporting terrorism. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said that the review had been mishandled. A lot of people are saying, is there some kind of wider anti-Islamic sentiment to all of this, which is, of course, vehemently denied. Here is, for a bit of context, before we get stuck into a debate on this, here's what Home Secretary Suella Braverman had to say in the Commons a little earlier.
Prevent needs major reform. Prevent needs to better understand the threats we face and the ideology underpinning them. 80% of counter-terrorism police networks' live investigations are Islamist. MI5 are clear that Islamist terrorism remains our predominant threat, accounting for 75% of their caseload. Yet only 16% of Prevent referrals in 2021-22 were Islamist. Prevent has shown cultural timidity and an institutional hesitancy to tackle Islamism for fear of the charge of Islamophobia. The truth is, there is nothing anti-Muslim about tackling Islamism. And we must continue to work closely with Muslim communities if we are to do so effectively.
Yeah, but get a load of this, people, OK? The fact that this report into Prevent is actually being released, and being released pretty much in full, is after quite a long battle, because they didn't want to necessarily do that, because they didn't want to, here we go again, stoke racial tension. So that in itself can't be anti-Muslim, can it? Because they were dead keen to not cause any offence to anybody. Also, people might be shocked to learn, although probably not shocked in this day and age, actually, to learn that quite a lot of Prevent scheme money was given to a group that, when the Taliban took control of Afghanistan, they thought, that might be quite a good thing. So that's where some of your money's going, ladies and gents. Anyway, joining me now is Dr. Rakib Ehsan, social policy analyst, and Joe Hemmings, a behavioural psychologist. Thank you very much, both of you. A very nuanced topic, this. I'm going to focus on a particular element of this. And, Joe, I will start with you in your capacity as a behavioural psychologist. Is being a radical terrorist a mental illness?
No, terrorism is not a mental illness. Some people are more susceptible to being influenced, coerced, manipulated into extremist ideologies or ways of thinking. That does not give them a mental disorder. The only mental disorders really that you would find any evidence would show would be in single issue lone attackers. So those people who take it upon themselves, not in a group, by themselves, to go out and do something hugely destructive, they would probably be considered to have some sort of mental disorder. But terrorism itself in a group situation, some people are vulnerable, but they're more likely to be just influenced by people who can coerce them. For whatever reasons they have, they are just susceptible to that kind of influence, but it's not a mental illness.
OK, well, Dr Rakib, I'll bring you in now. You're a social policy analyst. Now, I spoke to an imam on a show I was covering last night. He said all of Prevent is against all Muslims. I also spoke to an individual earlier on in this show who was supposedly an advisor to Prevent, and he said that the whole thing is grounded in Islamophobia. Do you believe that the counter-terror scheme that we've got is institutionally racist against Muslims?
Well, I've heard these narratives many times before that Prevent has alienated the entire British Muslim community. But there was a report published back in 2020 by Press Advisory, which showed that the majority of British Muslim respondents surveyed had not even heard of Prevent. So I'm very confused how you can be alienated by a programme that you've never heard of. I think that what we have in Britain generally, we have a wider narrative setting infrastructure, which offers the view that our counter-extremism structures are anti-Muslim, when I actually see evidence of referrals, for example, to Prevent, the ideological composition of referrals doesn't match the wider terror threat picture. Islamist extremism is the principal terror threat in modern-day Britain. But when you look in the year 2020-21, for example, only 22% of referrals were Islamist-related, concerned Islamism, while, as the Home Secretary has said, 80% of the counter-terrorism policing's network's live investigations, 80%, 4 and 5, are Islamist-related. So you see that there's a fundamental mismatch in terms of how our broader counter-terrorism infrastructure is working.
Yeah. Joe, I'll throw it back your way. Again, your capacity as a behavioural psychologist. It would appear that one aspect of human psychology is a desire to not cause offence to anyone, and the fact that we maybe are quite terrified about it. Do you think that there's elements of that leak into public policy? We wouldn't want to, quote, unquote, stoke racial tensions, and that can actually mask the way that we deal with things, in this case, like terrorism.
Yeah, I think there is to a degree. As a psychologist coming from an impartial perspective, I'm talking about all forms of extremism and dangerous radicalisation of any form, whatever group you're in. So yes, there is. We should just be looking at that and not be putting it to any form of religion or race or creed. These are just extremists of any sort. So what I would say again is the lone attacker very often has a mental disorder. The group, a person who's influenced to join a group probably doesn't. They have all sorts of reasons why they may. And we've got to look at it with a perspective of not being frightened, of looking like we are anti anything other than pro, trying to get this sorted out does a huge amount of damage. We've got to say, not handle it with kid gloves. Terrorism is not a mental illness.
Dr. Rakib, just very finally, very quickly, on this particular issue right now, do you actually think that we will get this sorted as long as there are people, apologists out there, who are willing to take taxpayers' money and then go on and pledge support or certainly show support for the Taliban, and they're involved in the Prevent scheme? I mean, it's not going to work, is it, if that's the case?
Well, it's absolutely shocking. We need to strengthen our due diligence checks. I think there needs to be an investigation in itself in terms of how those funds were allocated. We need to examine those procedures and make sure there's no repeat of that. And I think more generally, Patrick, we have to confront this culture of political correctness and radical identity politics, because that has no place in matters of security.
Thank you very much. Dr. Akiba San, social policy analyst, and Joe Hemmings, a behavioural psychologist, reacting to Prevent. Anyway, you're with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Coming up, the partner of missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley, has visited the spot where police believe that she fell into the River Wire. We're also going to hear from Volodymyr Zelensky himself, believe it or not. There we go. We're back in a tick.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Let's bring you the latest news headlines this hour. And in a historic visit to the UK, the Ukrainian president has addressed Parliament, hailing the strong British character that has been shown in response to the Russian invasion. He also had kind words for a former Prime Minister. And let's just play the correct clip here about President Zelensky. The Prime Minister has been asking the Defence Secretary which UK military jets could be donated in support of Ukraine. And you can see, if you're watching television, earlier King Charles welcomed President Zelensky to Buckingham Palace following the Ukraine leader's historic address to MPs at Westminster Hall. And he's using his visit to urge the UK and Western allies to provide what he called wings for freedom by supplying his Air Force with advanced air power. We can see pictures on TV of Zelensky shaking hands with Rishi Sunak earlier outside number 10 Downing Street.
The guide smiled and offered me to sit down on this armchair from which war orders had been given. And he asked me, how did I feel? And I said that I certainly felt something. But it is only now that I know what the feeling was. And all Ukrainians know it perfectly well too. It is the feeling of how bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Meanwhile, governments and organisations around the world are offering support to Turkey and Syria after 2 devastating earthquakes killed more than 11,000 people. The Foreign Office says 3 British people are still missing following the disaster. The UK government has pledged support to Turkey's President Erdogan, who's declared a state of emergency for 3 months in the 10 worst affected cities. He's been out meeting survivors and emergency crews that are working to save lives in sub-zero temperatures. And the government's anti-terror programme is not doing enough to tackle non-violent Islamist extremism, according to a new report. It's also accused the government of double standards when dealing with extreme right-wing and Islamist ideology. The Home Secretary admitted the scheme needs major reform and should focus on security rather than political correctness. The government has accepted all 34 recommendations made by the review. In other news today, the former Labour MP Jared Amara has been found guilty of 6 counts of fraud from during his time in office. The 41-year-old, who was a Member of Parliament between 2017 and 2019, was on trial for submitting fake invoices to Parliament worth around £24,000 to fund his cocaine habit. A jury cleared him of 2 other charges, sentencing taking place tomorrow at Leeds Crown Court. Those are your latest news headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. Here's Patrick.
Look, just a quick heads up, ladies and gentlemen. Pretty much any moment we're expecting to hear from Volodymyr Zelensky himself, so we'll throw to that as and when. But before we get to that, the partner of missing Nicola Bulley has visited the spot where police believe that she fell into the River Wyre. After another day of scouring the area, underwater search expert Peter Faulding said he's baffled after failing to find the mother of 2. Nicola Adam is the editor of the Lancashire Post, and she joins me now. Nicola, thank you very much. I can only imagine that the area where you're covering at the minute is absolutely up in arms about all of this. Just a really mysterious case, isn't it?
Yeah, it's incredibly tense here in Lancashire, actually, because there's so much going on. The entire world's media has landed upon a really small little village.
Nicola, very sorry. Hold that thought, Nicola. Massive apologies. We're going live now to Dorset, where the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is speaking alongside Rishi Sunak from Lulworth British military camp.
And just a few days ago, dozens arrived to learn how to operate our Challenger 2 tanks. I'm told they're already mastering the art of driving these 62-ton sophisticated weapons, which will soon be making a difference on the battlefield of your country. All over the United Kingdom, Ukrainian men and women are learning how to command and control NATO-standard weapons, whether that is in drone warfare, tank operations, or basic training. Their dedication, courage, and determination is a credit to you and your country. And Volodymyr, your visit here today underlines our 2 countries' close and enduring friendship. We will always be by your side, your staunch and unwavering friends. We both know the people of Ukraine's incredible strength and inspiring bravery will ultimately defeat tyranny. That is why we are training and arming them with the equipment they need to push back Russian forces. And as I said to you earlier today, we are also accelerating the delivery of our equipment, the equipment of our allies, to ensure that it reaches your front line in coming days and weeks, not months or years. The Ukrainian crews who arrived last week will be using Challenger 2 tanks to defend Ukraine's sovereign territory next month. And I'm pleased that today we have agreed that we will expand our training program, a program that has trained 10,000 troops in the last 6 months alone, to your Marines and fighter jet pilots, ensuring the armed forces of Ukraine are able to defend their country for generations to come. We must arm Ukraine in the short term, but we must bolster Ukraine for the long term. Your country cannot be left vulnerable to attack ever again. Today we have signed the London Declaration, further deepening our cooperation, and in the coming days we will mark a year since this needless and unprovoked invasion, and Russia will see more than ever that their tactics are only solidifying Western resolve, only convincing us to go further and faster to help you, Vladimir, and we will. After all, you told me last week that collective international unity is your greatest weapon, and you can be sure that we will deliver on that, not just now, but long into the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Prime Minister, шановний присутні, шановний прем'єр-міністр, шановні журналісти, усі присутні, британці, наші військові. Сьогодні ми з паном прем'єр-міністром фіналізуємо наші перемовини, важливі саме тут, на військовій базі, де тренуються українські воїни. Сьогодні ми почали день з оборонних питань в розмові з Ріші.
Okay, all right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, obviously that is Volodymyr Zelensky there. Now he is clearly, as you can all hear, talking Ukrainian. But I am going to summarise what Rishi Sunak said. He said that basically we're going to be Ukraine's staunch and unwavering ally. So we'll always be by their side. We'll always be their friend. He's pledged to essentially support Ukraine in basically any way that we possibly can. The very latest today is that Zelensky arrived. He touched down, didn't he, in this country. He went to meet Rishi Sunak initially. He then obviously went on to go and speak with various different MPs in Westminster Hall, etc. And he basically thanked us in advance for fighter jets, which as yet not have been promised. But we're going to go back now to Volodymyr Zelensky, who now has a translator, which is nice.
Спільної перемоги. Звичайно, я не можу зараз говорити про всі деталі саме того, про що ми говорили і чим посилюємо Україну, але можу сказати, що цей візит, він став дійсно результативний. Я дякую Ріші, дякую прем'єр-міністру Сунаку.
Yes, unfortunately, he does not appear to have a translator as it currently stands, but there we go. Right, OK, so yes, just to whiz you through essentially what the state of play is at the moment, which is Volodymyr Zelensky is calling for actual fighter jets. Rishi Sunak appears to be rolling the wicket for that. He has pledged that Britain will support Ukraine in any way that they possibly can. They will stand by their side. They will be an unwavering ally. And following on from the legacy that Boris Johnson first started, when, frankly, before anyone else had really got their backsides in gear, Great Britain decided to go and take the mantle up there and do what we could to stop Ukraine falling immediately into Vladimir Putin's clutches. And I think we can all agree that we were right to do so. Rishi Sunak standing there basically saying, look, what we will do from now on is support you in almost any way we can. The pledges today were that British fighter pilots were going to be going to train Ukrainians in the NATO standard technology. Not just with that, though, but with all other types of technology. Just a quick summary of what Britain has already done in terms of support for Ukraine. In total, the UK has provided £2.3 billion worth of military aid to Ukraine. That was last year, OK? So that was at the end of 2022. More than any other nation other than the United States. Now, I think that's a point worth noting, isn't it? I know a lot of you are very concerned about the idea that a lot of people are friends on the continent, as it were. The countries that if big, mad Vlad decided to continue to roll his tanks through Ukraine and into the continent, that they would be gobbled up first, wouldn't they? And why did it take so long for them to act? I believe we were sending a variety of different military equipment, whilst the Germans were just sending rainbow-coloured helmets. I can hear a translator now, so I'm going to shut up and listen to them.
Willingness to work with us in executing the Ukrainian peace formula. And I also would like to thank all of our Ukrainian warriors, whether it's every soldier, sergeant, officer or general. Our state is doing and will be doing to make sure that on the front line we have everything in the maximum that's owned by other leading countries. Ukraine will be among those countries who has everything to defend their people. Glory to everyone fighting for Ukraine. Many thanks to everyone who helps Ukraine. Again, thank you, Rishi. Thank you to all the people in Great Britain. Thank you for all these 350 days of unity. Glory to Ukraine.
I think we have some time for a few questions from the media. Can we start with ITV News? Is there someone here?
Hello, Rohit Khatri from ITV. Mr. President, first of all, you've made a broad and emotional appeal today for further support. But I think a lot of British people want to know some of the specifics. For example, when do you believe this Russian offensive will happen? How many fighter jets do you need? When do you need them? And what happens if you don't get them? And to you, Mr. Prime Minister, you seem to be inching towards a position of being able to provide fighter jets towards for the Ukrainians. Can you offer absolute clarity here and now? Will they get them? And if so, when?
Thanks, Rohit, for the question. Why don't I start, and then I'll do that, Vladimir. So, look, first of all, we've been very clear, and we've been clear for a long time, that when it comes to the provision of military assistance to Ukraine, nothing is off the table. And that's because we're determined to ensure that Vladimir, the president, and his people can be victorious against Russian aggression. And we've backed up that rhetoric with action. Last year, behind the United States, we were the single largest donor of military equipment to Ukraine, and we said that we would match or exceed that amount, almost £2.5 billion again this year. And you saw when it came to the provision of main battle tanks, we were the first G7 nation. I announced that weeks ago, something that the President and I had discussed previously. It was important in order to ensure that Ukraine could make progress on the battlefield. And I think we helped lead an international conversation which led to many other countries following us and providing main battle tanks to Ukraine. So when it comes to fighter combat aircraft, of course, they are part of the conversation. Indeed, we've been discussing that today and have been previously. And that's why we've announced today that we will be training Ukrainian Air Force on NATO standard platforms. Because the first step in being able to provide advanced aircraft is to have soldiers or aviators that are capable of using them. That is a process that takes some time. We've started that process today. That's because we're keen to support the President and his country in delivering a victory. And nothing is off the table. And our leadership on this issue is something that we all collectively should be very proud of. And I know that the President is grateful for.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your question. With regard to the equipment, that we need, of course, there's a lot of equipment we need and a lot of different equipment. It all depends on the situation, on the battlefield, on the kind of in the military direction, but also depends on what's happening within the country. You know how we are fighting against the Iranian drones. You know, there are hundreds and thousands of them, and we are fighting against them by various means, and that includes also our ballistic missiles, because these unmanned vehicles, these Iranian drones, they hit civilian infrastructure, educational infrastructure, hospitals, schools, civilians, because they are trying to threaten Ukrainians, but they're trying to make them flee, but Ukrainians are not going to flee, because that is why when we talk about this, we do need air defense systems, and we are grateful to everyone who is providing them. And that also, when we have those systems, that allows people to go to work, and once people work, obviously this money, they'll not just go for pensions or other social welfare, but also this also goes to support our warriors. That's why it's very important that we have everything needed to support people in their jobs. And when we talk about the battlefield, what are our priorities? Of course, armored vehicles. We know that our enemy has got thousands units of armored vehicles, back from the Soviet Union heritage, and of course NATO armored vehicles, they are the best, and yet there are only few of them. When you only have 10 NATO armored vehicles against 1,000 of Soviet armored vehicles, well, what are the chances, And we have no way out. We have to stand firm. We need armored vehicles, we need tanks, we need fighter jets, and obviously we've spent a lot of time talking about this together, and you've just heard what Mr. Prime Minister has already mentioned, and even today and tomorrow we will be meeting with the EU leaders and discussing these issues, and also longer-range missiles. That's our priority, and I'm very grateful that Britain has finally heard us in that regard, and I do hope that other countries will also hear us when it comes to longer-range missiles, because we do need to push back the Russians so people can just live. And as to the offensive, what can I say? Frankly, we live in the state of war. What can I say here? We cannot be just thinking about the offensive. The offensive has never happened, it's just been a different kind of intensity. So all we need to think is that let us make Russians think about Ukrainian counteroffensive, okay? They need to be thinking about this. They need to be thinking how they should be leaving our territory. That's all I would like to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. Next, can I call on BBC Ukraine?
Вітаю, пане президенте. Дякую за ваш приїзд. Я б вас хотіла обійняти і подякувати, але не можна. Але
not allowed. Why not? Please.
Gentlemen, so what we can see there, if you're watching on television, is that Volodymyr Zelensky has just gone to give a representative of BBC Ukraine a massive hug, and that's what's happened there. So they're obviously old friends. She is now asking him a question in English, and we're going to take it back to that.
You know that Ukrainian soldiers, they are dying every day. Don't you think that that decision about warplanes is taking too long? And and the other question is, what are your steps to clear the reputation of London as a city that is still laundering Russian money? Thank you.
So I think you heard from the President's previous answer, Natalia, about the very immediate needs, and that's air defence and long-range missiles. And that's the conversation that we've been having most recently about how can we provide air defence to protect the Ukrainian population. That has been the thing that we've talked about probably most in all of our conversations, which is why we've provided thousands of surface-to-air missiles and air defence systems, and will continue to do so, and more are coming over the next few weeks. And as the President said, probably the most crucial capability right here and now is main battle tanks, which we led on, but also those long-range missiles. I think that and all the talking that we've done and the planning for how we can have decisive victory on the battlefield and make progress, it requires long-range missiles, which currently the range is not there. And again, that's the conversation that we've been having, and again, we hope that Britain can lead. But when it comes to protecting soldiers, I think we feel very acutely the tragedy and the hardship that your country and your countrymen are going through. And we've both had the privilege of meeting some of them today. I've met some of them in the past, and their bravery is inspiring. It's awe-inspiring to see, as I have, the ordinary citizens, young men and women who are fighting to defend their country and being trained to do so here. And they go with not just our wishes and our training, but they go with our full support, with all the equipment that we can continue to provide them, and will continue to do so. But rest assured, we are here with you, with your people, and continue to provide you with whatever we can to ensure their safety and indeed their success. Thank you. And with regard to sanctions, I think we've, as you saw at the beginning of this conflict, I used to be the finance minister, and we put in place, the President talked about it earlier today, probably the most extensive and forward-leaning sanctions package of any country at the beginning of this conflict, to demonstrate very clearly that Russia's aggression was unacceptable and we would punish them in every which way we could. We've announced further sanctions today, but continually when it comes to sanctions, we have, I think, led. And you remember the conversations we had on things like SWIFT and banks right at the beginning of this conflict. Again, it was Britain that led the way in pushing for very strict sanctions, and as I said, we've announced further today. And wherever we can continue, to tighten them and do more, we will look to do so, as we have done today. Next, can we go to Sky News, please?
Thank you. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News. Prime Minister, if I could ask you first of all, there does seem to have been a lag between Ukraine asking for more sophisticated weaponry and it eventually being given. They asked for more advanced artillery. It was eventually sent. They've asked for tanks, and they will be sent eventually. They now want fighter jets, and we're training their pilots, but we're not sending the jets. Your predecessor, one of your predecessors, a close friend of President Zelensky, has wondered why we're not doing more, why not send more so they can finish off the job now. What is holding the West back? Why is there that lag? Mr. President, good to see you again. If I could ask you about fighter jets, how urgently do you need them, and what does it mean for your country if you don't get them?
So, I mean, I'll take that as the first question. And again, I probably started with the notion of the question, because I think we have continually led, actually, in the UK with the provision of equipment to Ukraine, and whether it was right at the beginning with anti-tank missiles, whether, as you heard from the President, the importance of armoured vehicles, I think we've sent hundreds, whether it's artillery guns, again, in the next few weeks, a new set of batteries of artillery guns will arrive, tanks we've already talked about, and we're training combat aircraft for the first time. Indeed, actually something that we should have probably been doing a long time ago, because we have a long-standing training relationship with Ukraine that predates the war, but that is something, as we look forward, we'll want to continue to do more of, as we want to make sure that the Ukrainian armed forces are trained on NATO standard equipment, and there's greater interoperability between Ukraine and NATO, which is very much something that we've been discussing. So I think actually we've continued to be on the forward-leading edge of it, and we're providing things as quickly as we can. The Challenger tanks are going to be on the battlefield, as I said, in a matter of weeks. I mean, you've seen the Ukrainian soldiers are being trained on them as fast as we can, and we're providing them as fast as we can, and we know that they will make a difference. And I think the President would tell you, we've been having conversations for the few months that I've had this job, and relatively rapidly after we discuss what is necessary, Ukraine sees that we do respond, and then we galvanize others to respond too. That's what we have done, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Thank you very much. And I would like to be honest with you here. In the history of this war, there are several pages, and one of these pages, so in fact, even sections, maybe in this war, has been a very special section for our warriors, and also Great Britain providing equipment. And here we're talking about javelins as well. And then our people had to rise up, and they had to fight with what they had. We're not doing any self-pitying here, okay? What they had, they were doing, and we were just grateful for whatever we were getting. And then we turned another page, and then we turned into we all turned into fury, because Russians were just killing and murdering people, and they were raping people, and we were ready to have anything and use any kind of weapons just to destroy them. And then we turned another page, artillery. We needed artillery. We needed to work in a different direction, and this is exactly where we received some help and support. For example, in certain places, obviously, Great Britain helped us a lot, but when it comes to HIMARS, we got a lot of help from the US, and we are really grateful to them for this page in the history of war. I think it's very important to understand that Russia has no pity for their own people. They just keep on throwing their people into the battlefield. Whereas we have pity, and we protect our people. We would not throw them just onto the battlefield. We needed to prepare them. And that kind of marked a different stage in the war. And now we've come to kind of this stagnation phase. You've just asked me what would happen if we don't get this fighter jets or longer range missiles, or we don't have enough ammunition, or because everything obviously is, running out and coming out of maintenance. If you don't have this 185 artillery, there will be stagnation. These people will be coming and be living on our territory, and this will pose great risk to all of the world, because they've captured a nuclear station and they just live there, you know. And this kind of risk will be everywhere because they are terrorists. And so without the weapons that we are discussing now and the weapons that we just discussed with Rishi earlier today and how Britain is going to help us, you know, all of this is very important. Without this, there will be stagnation, which will not bring to anything good.
Thank you. Next, we have Inter.
Good evening, Mr. Prime Minister. Доброго вечора, пане президенте. Я після прес-конференції до вас підійду. Буде нечесно, якщо я залишусь без обіймів.
I will come and see you after the press conference because I would like to get a hug as well.
Ви вже підвели підсумки сьогоднішньої роботи, але мені цікаво ваші особисті
враження. And yet I am very interested in your personal
на пальцях однієї руки, скільки днів ви провели поза межами України. Які враження бути в іншій країні під мирним небом, де вам нічого не
different country just under the peaceful sky. So what are your personal impressions? And what threatens me back at home? You know, yes, this is my second visit outside of Ukraine after the beginning of the Russian invasion. And you know what? I had to do two important things. And first of all, I had to express our deep gratitude of all the Ukrainian people to the people of Great Britain, to the government of Great Britain, to everyone who had been helping us to keep our land, to make sure that we don't lose it, because this is our land, which is dear to us. And you know, I think it's amazing that Great Britain has been so active in this fight. And truly, I am grateful. We should not be forgetting everything what we've gone through all of these months. At any point, we could have lost our independence, and yet, all of that time, we haven't had battalions, unfortunately.